Chapter 536. Bai Yulan went to the hospital to visit her family members who were forever in deep sleep. Xiong Linquan had already boarded the long-distance train home. Lu Jiao went to the hospital to find her sister to check on her lingering abdomen. Lan Xiaolong took a military transport to the port. Da Vinci, accompanied by Gu Shifeng, nervously stepped on the road to Xiao Shisan's house to propose marriage. After the Federation government's welcoming ceremony, the soldiers of the participating troops ushered in a rare vacation. The new 17th Division was disbanded on the spot. The new and old members of Group 7 were busy with their own things, so Su Lu had a rare period of time and space to be alone. Half an hour after the dust removal device was turned on, he walked to the window with a cup of fast food and opened the window. Looking at the small garden below the apartment and all the familiar but long-lost street scenes, a smile appeared on his face. The furnishings in the apartment were no different from before he left, and the street scenes were the same. The auntie who sold the food boxes was still loud and clear, and the tea house on the corner was still quiet. Life on planet S1 had not changed at all. There were no gunshots, cannons, shouts, or screams in his ears. Only the beautiful music drifted out from the window next door and the insects in the park below. There was no pungent smell of liquid explosives, no thick black smoke that covered the sun, no metal shells that dug into one's feet that one could not avoid no matter how hard one tried, and there was no blood flowing out, no gutted corpses, and no wounded soldiers howling in pain. There were only 2 quiet moons in the night sky and a few clouds that slowly brushed against the faces of the moons. Su Lu could not help but feel a little lost. The fierce battles that happened at the front line did not seem to affect the rear at all. Between here and there, like the joys and sorrows of many people, it was a completely different world. But he had experienced and clearly experienced the great cruelty of life and death. Before he understood it himself, the experience at the front line had already left a deep impression on his life. Those subtle changes that had not yet fermented might appear clearly one day in the future. After casually finishing the lunchbox, he carefully cleaned the room and sat comfortably on the leather sofa that Zoyu had bought for him. He turned on the TV and watched the drama on Channel 23 with a relaxed and satisfied expression. There was a glass of cheap red wine by his hand. This was a habit that he had developed since he was a teenager. Unfortunately, after the metal frenzy ended, he could no longer see the fluffy purple-haired girl on this channel. Perhaps he would go to Philadelphia to visit her in 2 days. Su Li's thick black eyebrows raised slightly as he thought of this possibility with a smile. In the next few days, Su Lu talked to Tai Ziyuan on the phone. However, he didn't want to go to the back of Macho's mountain to meet the madam. Firstly, he didn't like her, and secondly, he had to admit that he had always been afraid of her. Li Xiaotong was in S2. The Sanlin United Bank had made a large investment in the reconstruction of the 4 states around the mountain. Many projects worth billions of dollars were being implemented. To be able to take charge of such an important task, the 7th young master's status in the family and in the eyes of the old man who loved to wear a small round hat had greatly improved. Su Lu was very happy to see this scene, but if the 2 of them wanted to get together, they would have to wait until next week. Little Watermelon was busy preparing for an exam in Shixia State and reuniting with her father. The little girl begged Su Lu to play with her over the phone, but for some reason, after just leaving the battlefield, he felt a little loose and lazy all over. He didn't want to be too far away from the apartment. His subordinates and friends were gone or living their own lives in other places. Su Lu didn't have any classmates, old friends, or relatives in the capital ring. As for the interview requests of some news media and the luncheons of the relevant departments, he politely declined all of them. The next day, he made an appointment with little Professor Shen to go to Xinghe Cemetery. In front of Professor Shen's grave, he placed a small bouquet of dehydrated yellow flowers from 5460. Then he returned to the Wangdu apartment again. Day and night, he watched TV, ate lunch boxes, and spaced out. After just 3 days of the long holiday, the days became as heavy as if they were covered in a thick layer of dust. This situation persisted until he received a call from someone he thought was busy playing with flowers. Only then did he remember Minister Zhou's low voice at the spaceport that day. He was surprised to discover that in the center of the Federation, other than this apartment and the concierge at Yue University, the most familiar place to him was actually the minister's building in the Shishan compound. A black car without any markings drove silently on the street without attracting anyone's attention. On both sides of the road were more than 100,000 pots of flowers carefully prepared by the Capital Parks Department to celebrate the victory of the war. They were placed from Charter Square to the president's official residence, then extended westward all the way to the core area of the army. These flowers of different colors bloomed beautifully under the sun and warm wind, blooming, blooming. Su Lu retracted his gaze from the window and couldn't help but shake his head. It was already the spring of year 70 of the constitutional calendar. It had been more than 4 years since he left Donglin and came to the capital ring. The problem was that he had once again forgotten what the new year looked like. Once life became intense and exciting, would the footsteps of time become so hurried? The black car slowly stopped at the entrance of the Shishan compound. The most important departments and research institutions of the federal military gathered within a 10-kilometer radius of the main street. People in military uniforms entered and exited the buildings calmly and quickly. Only the entrance of the Shishan compound was exceptionally quiet. Other than the 2 armed military police at the entrance, there were no security measures, but anyone in the Federation knew how tight the security of this compound was. After a strict identity check and a secondary scan of the Federation's electronic surveillance network, the military police heard a beep and looked at the results on the handheld scanner. They stood at attention with a snap, gave a standard military salute to the person in the car, and said with a smile, "Lieutenant Colonel Su Lu, please come in." The military police of the Shishan compound and even the surveillance personnel in the central control room were very familiar with this black car and Su Lu in it, but discipline was discipline. In the past, after Su Lu passed the inspection, he would always chat with the military police, but today he was obviously not in the mood. After nodding, he started the car again. The roof of the car reflected the clear sky, and the deep green and even a little gloomy shade trees kept retreating outside the window. Su Lu narrowed his eyes and said with a frown, "I must be crazy to bring you into the Shishan compound." Sitting beside him, Shi Qinghai flicked the hard brim of his military cap with his finger, making a snap sound. A smile flashed across his handsome and elegant face, and he said, "Friend, aren't we friends?" Su Li's face was a little ugly. He was able to bring Mr. Shi into the heavily guarded Shishan compound. He didn't know if it was because the military police gave him face and didn't check very carefully, or because the old guy opened the back door again, but no matter what it was, he could feel great pressure on his shoulders. "Don't be so cheeky." He had a headache and said, "You asked me to bring you to the compound. What exactly do you want to do? Life is not a Schiller script. Even if you want to meet Zhou Yu, you don't have to climb over the balcony. There are countless bars and tea houses outside the compound open. I'm not going to climb over the balcony to see my woman and my son." Shi Qinghai's smile gradually disappeared and he said calmly, "I want to see Zhou Yingxing." Fortunately, Su Li's nerves were much stronger than the average person's, so when he heard this, he didn't panic and drive the car into the big tree on the side of the road. However, his face became a little pale, and he angrily scolded in a low voice, "You're crazy. That's the Minister of Defense. Although he looks like a scholar, I can guarantee that there are countless guns in his study, and they're all loaded." In the depths of the compound, the door of a separate 3-story building was wide open. As far as the eye could see, the Federation's Minister of Defense, Zhou Yingxing, was sitting on the sofa like an ordinary person, wearing a pair of glasses and carefully reading some documents on the electronic screen. "You're here." Minister Zhou heard the footsteps, but didn't raise his head. He casually greeted, "So you just returned from Linhai a few days ago?" "Right now. She's upstairs coaxing the child." "Sit down first. Tonight's dinner is your favorite, braised tofu skin." Su Lu looked at him sitting on the sofa, his back dripping with cold sweat. His throat was incomparably dry, and he didn't know what to say. He greatly admired this low-key Minister of Defense. Only the soldiers on the front line could truly feel that the Minister of Defense, who came from the logistics system, had provided such a strong support for this victorious military operation. Oh, right. Zhou Yu is currently studying at the 3rd campus. I heard that her grades are pretty good. You once taught this good-for-nothing son of mine a lesson. Now it seems that it was indeed useful. Still hearing no reply, Minister Zhou raised his head in confusion. He took off his glasses and looked at the extremely nervous Su Lu and the officer beside him. He couldn't help but frown slightly. He said, "You brought a friend here." "Hello, I'm the liaison officer of the Special Forces, Shi Qinghai." Shi Qinghai smiled and introduced himself. "Previously, you said that I taught Major Zhou Yu a lesson, and the other person is me." Minister Zhou's frown gradually dissipated. He put his glasses on the coffee table and looked up at the 2 young people at the door. His face was calm and full of pressure. He slowly asked, "I know you, but, then what?" Shi Qinghai stood there in silence for a long time. After taking a deep breath, he walked to the front of the sofa and bowed 120 degrees very seriously and respectfully. His head seemed to almost touch his knees. Then he straightened his body and looked straight ahead. In a loud and sincere voice, he asked, "Minister, I am Lu Hua's biological father. Please allow me to take your daughter as my legal wife." When Shi Qinghai walked over resolutely, Su Lu wanted to grab him. But for some reason, his outstretched hand slowed down. However, he didn't expect that his best friend would say such words on their first meeting. He looked worriedly at the minister on the sofa. He was very worried that he would faint from anger. He was even more worried that if he didn't faint, he would call for a group of Special Forces soldiers to kill him and Shi Qinghai. Unexpectedly, Minister Zhou's expression didn't change. He picked up the glasses on the coffee table and put them on his nose. He continued to read the documents in silence. Chapter 537. There were no decorative green plants in the spacious living room, only a few light brown pots of iron trees. There were gear-shaped handicrafts on the white wall in the corner, as well as small bullet shell sculptures on the round table in the corner of the light-colored sofa. The interior of the building was filled with a clear military atmosphere, which was very suitable for the identity of the owner of the building. He was firm and silent and powerful. Minister Zhou sat on the sofa and began to read the documents again. The silence in the quiet living room gradually turned into an ominous silence. A kind of tough atmosphere began to fill the air. This atmosphere was a kind of torture for Shi Qinghai, who was standing in front of him, and Su Lu, who was standing at the door. No one dared to speak in the entire living room. In the absolute silence, the sound of breathing gradually became audible. The ticking of the old-fashioned clock on the wall became clearer and clearer, and even the sound of children crying upstairs could be faintly heard. Shi Qinghai still maintained a respectful smile, but his calm eyebrows began to moisten. In the silence, he took a deep breath, bowed deeply again, and then maintained this posture without moving an inch. During this process, he was as silent as Minister Zhou, who was sitting in the chair, because both of them knew very well that the silence meant that nothing was said. However, Minister Zhou's expression did not change at all. He quietly read the documents, and the faint light spots reflected on his spectacles. He did not even notice the existence of the person in front of him. After more than 10 minutes, he finally finished reading the documents that he needed to review today. He took off his spectacles, rubbed his eyebrows, and stood up. After a moment of silence, he looked at Su Lu and said, "Are you trying to say that this person is the father of my grandson?" The silence was finally broken. Su Lu breathed a sigh of relief and nodded silently. At this time, Shi Qinghai was very perceptive and did not make any unnecessary movements or words. He just quietly waited on the side. Minister Zhou did not give him a chance to wait for the result. This military boss narrowed his eyes, put his hands behind his back, and walked straight upstairs, without even looking at him. "Come to the study," Minister Zhou said in a deep voice as he walked up the stairs without looking back. Su Lu responded and followed him with his head lowered. His sharp eyes noticed that the minister's arms seemed to be trembling slightly under his sleeves. Was it because of anger or something else? Shi Qinghai's eyebrows furrowed slightly as he watched the two disappear into the stairwell. He shook his head and was about to follow them into the study, but when his feet were 10 centimeters away from the first wooden step, Secretary Jiao and 2 Secret Service officers with calm eyes blocked his way. With a wry smile on his face, Shi Qinghai looked at the people in front of him and said with a sigh, "It was originally a beautiful thing, why did we have to make it so complicated? Please sit on the sofa. Please don't make things difficult for us." Secretary Jiao smiled and invited him back to the sofa. She personally made him a cup of hot tea and then ignored him. Fortresses were always breached from the inside. Secretary Jiao and the military elites acted as orderlies. They could keep Shi Qinghai downstairs, but they could not stop the lady upstairs from coming down. Zhou Yu was wearing a red trench coat with short edges today. The black cocoa belt with gold in it met her flat stomach, outlining her graceful figure. She frowned at the man on the sofa and said with disgust, "You promised me in the letter that you would not disturb our lives." The "we" here referred to Zhou Yu and her most precious child. Young Master Shi, who usually wore an elegant face to hide his undisciplined and fearless heart, suddenly became serious and solemn when he heard these 2 words, and even a little sacred. He stood up from the sofa, looked at the beautiful girl in front of him, and said very seriously, "Like I said in the letter, after a long period of serious consideration and comprehensive consideration from a rational and emotional perspective, I think it is necessary for me to join your lives. In other words, we are together, and that is our life." Zhou Yu's bright eyes flashed with a trace of confusion and anger. She sat on the single-seater sofa, and her beautiful face flashed with strong sarcasm. She asked, "What do you want to do?" It seems that the way of explanation just now was a bit too artistic. Shi Qinghai took off his military cap, rubbed his hair carelessly, and said with a bright and handsome smile, "The purpose of my visit today is to marry you." The sarcasm on Zhou Yu's face disappeared instantly. She was stunned, and behind her was shock and inexplicable embarrassment. She slightly lowered her head and sneered to hide her emotions. After a while, she said, "This joke is not funny. This is not a joke. Just now, I formally proposed to your father. Because I don't have a family, I brought my best friend to be a witness and to show my sincerity," Shi Qinghai said in a gentle voice. Once this extremely handsome man showed such a sincere gentleness, instead of the seductive charm in the nightclub, he appeared so warm and friendly. Zhou Yu was dazzled by this smile. She narrowed her eyes and stared at him in a daze. She thought about how Su Lu had seen this scene with his own eyes, and thought about how this man in front of her had pestered her for the past year. All kinds of complicated emotions surged into her heart. There was even a faint sadness, helplessness, shame, anger, and some kind of warmth that she was unfamiliar with. But after all, she was Zhou Yu, who was as cold and elegant as a piece of porcelain. Therefore, she did not move, nor did she cry. She just fell into silence. Then, she picked up the kettle on the coffee table and made a second batch of tea for Shi Qinghai. The 88 degrees Celsius clean water mixed into the clean long glass cup, and the green tea spun non-stop. It rolled and stretched like fallen leaves in a stream, just like the mood of the silent 2 people on the sofa. Secretary Jiao quietly watched this scene. She gently waved her hand, and all the security guards in the building were taken away, so as not to disturb the silence in the living room and the study room. Minister Zhou kept opening drawers everywhere, as if he was looking for something. Finally, he found a dusty cedar box in the corner. He opened the box and took out a thick stick of gray tobacco. He clumsily held it with 3 fingers, but he could not find where he had put the lighter. Because of his wife, the minister had not smoked for many years. Su Lu saw this scene and felt a little complicated. He quickly walked forward and respectfully lit the cigarette for him. After Minister Zhou coughed twice, he quietly looked at the red light at the tip of the thick tobacco for a long time. In the end, he didn't smoke. He put the tobacco on the stone and let the light green smoke slowly release into the air. The first time I saw you was at Professor Shin's funeral in Xinghe Cemetery. It was raining that day, under a big tree. I told you, since you took the initiative to be the scapegoat, you should do it well. Minister Zhou looked up, his eyes calm but full of pressure. Under a tree on a rainy day, it is easy to be struck by lightning. It seems that my trust in you from the beginning was not very reliable. I understand, so as long as Yuzi is willing, I can keep on being the scapegoat. But you should know that I can only be the scapegoat, and have nothing to do with the scapegoat, Su Lu explained in a low voice. But the problem is that the scapegoat is not the style I like. Zhou Yingxing thought of the person on the sofa downstairs, and his eyes became cold. He said, and reckless and brave to the point of being an idiot. Shi Qinghai is my friend. Although he used to be a bit of a playboy, I can assure you that he will be the best husband if he is determined. Su Lu looked back at him and said seriously, and after all, he is Lu Hua's father. No one can change that. Department head Zhou did not reply immediately. A thick sense of mockery appeared on his face as he said, one of the most successful spies in Green Dragon Mountain. He dared to assassinate Macklin with you. This kind of person, is it possible to be confirmed? The daughter of the Federation's Minister of Defense can marry this kind of person? I am not surprised that the Minister of Defense would know a lot of information when he heard the name Shi Qinghai. Su Lu tried to ease the tension in the study, and said with a dry laugh, but at least this proves that he is indeed an outstanding person. It is not the Minister of Defense who is investigating him, but a father. Zhou Yingxing's voice sounded a little emotional. An anti-government spy who plays the violin every day outside the walls of the West Mountain compound. If he still can't figure out what is going on, it can only be said that this father has failed in his duty. Su Lu was shocked and then fell silent. Only now did he know that the minister had already determined who Lu Hua's father was. Speaking of which, although no one other than the two parties involved and Su Lu knew about the sudden drunken incident on that snowy night in Linhai, with the Minister of Defense's monstrous power, it wasn't very difficult to find those minute traces after some suspicion. I will not agree to this matter, because I do not want my daughter to marry a playboy, a playboy spy who can die at any time. Minister Zhou rebuked in a low voice, leaving no room for doubt. Su Lu did not have time to say more good words for Mr. Shi before he heard the minister's cold and simple last word. Get out. Su Lu was silent, and walked out of the study with his head down. He finally understood where Zhou Yu's fierce temperament came from. The minister's highly respected scholarly image was just a facade. Zhou Yingxing watched Su Li's back as he walked out of the study. His anger subsided a little, and he could not help but feel a little complicated. The image of a young man carrying a pot and walking forward with a smile appeared in his mind. He felt very regretful. A minute later, Su Lu and Shi Qinghai were kicked out of the door by a group of soldiers. Zhou Yu, wearing a red windbreaker, leaned against the door and smiled, holding a cup of green tea in her hand. At this time, the phone in Su Li's hand rang. He shouted angrily, "Speak." The caller was Gu Shifeng, but the one crying on the other end of the phone was Da Vinci. They had been kicked out of the house by Xiao Shisan's father with an alloy shower head. What made Da Vinci sad and happy was that Xiao Shisan's sister was very delicate. Su Lu hung up the phone and glanced at Mr. Shi, who was beside him with a gloomy expression. He could not help but feel depressed. Both sides of the marriage proposal were not going well. Chapter 538. The windows on both sides of the moving black car rolled down. Two hands stretched out, each holding a 37 brand cigarette. The cigarette had just lit up some ash, but it was blown away by the wind in front of the road, bright and red. Shi Qinghai took back his hand, took a deep breath, and licked his slightly bitter teeth with the tip of his tongue. He shook his head and said, "Speaking of which, I haven't said thank you to you since Zhou Yu was pregnant." "You're welcome. You said it was something I should do. Maybe the taste was a bit strange, but I really didn't put in much effort. I just didn't end your family line, so I don't deserve your thanks," Su Lu said mockingly. His hand holding the cigarette was on the car window, and his free little finger and ring finger kept tapping the car. Shi Qinghai threw the cigarette butt out of the window and replied, "If you can get my marriage done, I'll thank you properly. Although I also believe in freedom of marriage, you have to know that I'm not Judge He-Ying, who can't even give face to Philadelphia," Su Lu said somewhat angrily. "Her father is the Federation's Minister of Defense. What can I do? You have to think about this question yourself. My identity in Green Dragon Mountain is too sensitive. If you make too much noise, I'm afraid it will have the opposite effect," Shi Qinghai said shamelessly. Su Lu finished the cigarette in one breath, pressed the cigarette butt on the car's ashtray, and twisted it hard. He said, "In Lin Hai Bar, you repeated countless times that you are a bachelor. Why are you so persistent this time? Don't tell me that this is a new task that your organization has arranged for you. Don't worry, I never mix work and life together." Shi Qinghai looked at him and said mockingly, "Not all people who graduate from the 4 courses are like your Zhang Xiaomeng." This open arrow made Su Lu bleed. He looked around awkwardly, as if he was looking at the traffic situation on the road, but in fact, he was looking at the air. "In the past year, I've had a few work contacts with Ms. Zhang Xiaomeng. This woman seems to have changed a lot." Shi Qinghai smiled and looked at his black hair that was blown by the wind outside the window. He said, "If you want to relive the old dream, I can bridge the gap for you." Su Lu was speechless and could only remain silent. After a long time, he replied, "First, she and I have already passed. Secondly, if I want to be with her again, I don't need you to do anything. I know how to get to Parliament Hill. Thirdly, the difficulty of this matter is not equal to what you are doing now. All right, I'll explain to you why I want to marry Zhou Yu." Shi Qinghai said in a serious tone, "First, she is the mother of my son. I have lived for almost 30 years and only have one son. Secondly, she is very beautiful, really beautiful. I like to have a beautiful wife. In addition, in terms of genetics, if I marry her, I can provide countless idols for the Federation in the future, just like your Jian Shui'er. Don't always say that it's mine. No matter if it's Zhang Xiaomeng or Jian Shui'er, it's their own." Su Lu raised his right hand and warned seriously, "Although your reason is ridiculous, it does make sense." Zhou Yu's seductive yet not seductive, beautiful yet not serene face matched her cold red robes, making her very charming. Otherwise, it would be impossible for the Li family's 7th young master and madman Li of Philadelphia to have their hearts set on her. Su Lu, who got along well with her, admitted that, even if she was not the daughter of the Minister of Defense, she was still the most beautiful woman he knew. There was no one but only two, and she was on par with Jian Shui'er. "Going back to the beginning, I'm not only thankful that you took care of her and her son for me during that time, but I'm also thankful that you changed some of her temperament." Shi Qinghai lit another cigarette, and a trace of joy flashed across his handsome face. He said, "If she was still the daughter of a rich and powerful family in front of 13, it would be very difficult for me to find her cute side and have the impulse to end my single life, even if we had a son. In fact, she has always had a wonderful side in her heart, but it's a pity that she has been chosen as the crown princess since she was a child. She has lost her self-esteem, but has become more arrogant. Now, she is just showing her true side, and it has nothing to do with me. Speaking of which, maybe the child has a bigger impact. It has something to do with the child, but not as much as it has to do with you. You sound a little jealous?" Su Lu frowned and asked deliberately. "No." Shi Qinghai laughed loudly and patted him on the shoulder. "This is the charm of your personality. It's very difficult for you to make people feel negative emotions, and everyone who has been with you for a long time seems to become cuter like Zhou. Did he have the legendary charm of his personality that could affect the people around him? Su Lu thought about the comments made by Mr. Shi in the car, and felt a little ashamed and proud. This feeling lasted until he sat in front of the dining table in the official residence of the president, and his dark eyebrows were raised higher than usual. Lieutenant Colonel Su Lu, what are you so happy about? Can you share it with us? Or, would you like to share this plate of mashed potatoes with us first? That gentleman looks like he will be late for a long time, and I don't want the food I made to turn into a plate of ice later. Across the table, a lady in a light blue dress was holding a big bowl of mashed potatoes in her hand and putting them on an expensive antique porcelain plate. She looked at Su Lu, who was deep in thought, and asked with a smile. Su Lu suddenly woke up and nervously handed over the porcelain plate and said, "Madam, I just thought of something interesting." After returning to the capital special district, he refused all the celebratory dinners and luncheons, including those of the Nutshell Company, but today's banquet could not be declined, because this was a private dinner for the family of the President of the Federation, and the lady across from him was the First Lady of the Federation. "I think Padil and I are very willing to listen to the interesting things on the front line, but let's eat first," the First Lady said with a smile. Su Lu glanced at the silent daughter of the President beside him. Suddenly, his heart skipped a beat. Thinking of the difficult matter in the courtyard of West Mountain, he cleared his throat and took the porcelain plate with a smile, preparing to find an opportunity to have a good chat with the First Lady who was kind and committed to women's rights and freedom of marriage. Although the President's official residence was open to the public on a fixed date, the public still retained a strong curiosity and desire to pry into the life of the First Family. However, due to the strong protection of citizens' privacy in the First Charter, as well as the vague requirements of the official residence, no media dared to describe it in detail. It should be known that Mr. President himself was a lawyer. With his personality, he might really do something like sue the media in his capacity as president. Therefore, the people of the Federation only had guesses about the daily life of the First Family. Did the president eat Li Nguyen's summer specials every day? Was the anti-insect ring used by the dog raised by the First Lady really specially developed by Lin Fang? Would the First Lady never touch the pot she used to cook? When he was in Donglin, Su Lu once had such a guess. Of course, now he was very clear that there was nothing special about the dinner at the president's official residence. The First Lady's cooking skills seemed to be inferior to his own. At least from the obvious burnt potato powder ring, he could see that the kitchen utensils she used were definitely not as high-tech as people imagined. The soft light enveloped the quiet dining table. Su Lu suppressed his eating speed to cooperate with the president's family. This was the third time he had been invited to the president's official residence alone to enjoy a dinner personally cooked by the First Lady, but he was still nervous. No matter how thick his nerves were, he was still just an ordinary person. This was the president's official residence, where the most powerful person in the entire Federation, no, in the entire universe, lived. Another reason for his nervousness was that he did not understand why the president treated him so intimately and kindly, whether it was the foundation building incident, the amnesty matter, or many other details, such as the dinner at this time. This had nothing to do with the Lees of Philadelphia. When the president intended to pardon him, the old man had not yet entered the Qingqing military prison. This also had nothing to do with Macho's back mountain. It should be known that Lady Tai had already given up on him. This also had nothing to do with his contributions. When the president of the Federation awarded war heroes, there were always several rows of handshakes. How could there be such a private dinner that made him feel warm and surprised? "Sorry, I'm late." The president rolled up his sleeves and quickly walked in from outside the door. A simple smile appeared on his tanned face. He said loudly, "I finally understand why this job earns me more money every year than when I was a lawyer. It's because being the president requires more overtime than being a lawyer." Su Lu stood up to welcome him. The three people at the table all laughed. President Pabre dotingly rubbed his daughter's head and then signaled for Sulu to sit down. He turned to his wife and said with a smile, "Thank you for preparing my favorite spicy mashed potatoes, but our young hero just came back from the front line. He probably needs some fried high-fat meat the most." The First Lady smiled and was about to say something when Sulu hurriedly replied, "Mr. President, he thought of the protein synthetic meat that he had eaten since he was a child, and the fiber was terrible. After a while, he said hesitantly, it's on 5460. The provisions of the army are very good, and we ate a lot of game in the forest. It tasted very good." President Pabre paused for a moment, then laughed and said, "I didn't hear that because I don't want the HTD Bureau to accuse our brave soldiers." The president's daughter, who was sitting next to Sulu, looked at him curiously and asked very slowly, "Did you eat it?" "It's okay. You also know that it's an enemy-occupied area." "From a legal point of view, it's a temporary blank zone," Sulu replied with some embarrassment. President Pabre used a silver spoon with the insignia of the dynasty to pick up some sesame paste and mixed it into the mashed potatoes. After taking a big bite, he shook his head in satisfaction. He then looked up and smiled at him. "There's no enemy-occupied area anymore." Sulu smiled and replied, "Yes, Mr. President." President Pabre smiled and said, "Just now, General Hong Yuliang sent another piece of good news. The Federal fleet successfully set up an ambush in the desolate Star Zone outside the West Woods. The Empire's expeditionary fleet that set out 6 years ago was completely wiped out." Sulu looked at the president in surprise. If this news was true, then the Federation's military operations in the West Woods had truly come to a perfect end. Chapter 539. After the last space war, the Federal fleet had been stationed in the Night Scorpion Nebula and Gary Corridor for a long time, because the two self-generated giant warp holes were the only space channels that connected the Federation and the Imperium. The Night Scorpion Nebula and Gary Corridor were like two space gates made by the Creator, and the keys to the two gates had always been in the hands of the Federation. The Federation could freely choose the time to open the two gates and enter the Imperium based on the political, economic, and military situation. It was an indescribable advantage in terms of strategy. Everyone knew what the control of the two space channels meant for the situation of the entire universe. The Imperium had spent decades and generations of scientists researching without sleep and food. They had invested unprecedented resources and wealth, but they still could not achieve any success. To this day, they could only remain silent and frustrated in the face of the vast universe and launch a 6-year expedition to vent their anger and ambition. But the Federal Army had never let down its guard, because no one knew whether or not the Imperium's technological level would skyrocket in a certain field because of the appearance of a certain genius. No one knew when, in the future, the densely packed small warships of the Imperium would pass through the space channels like a disgusting swarm of insects, silently appear in the black background of the universe, and march toward the prosperous and peaceful capital ring. Although the Federation's warships were much more powerful than the Imperium's warships, people would feel suffocated when they imagined such a bloody and terrifying picture. Because of the strong uneasiness and vigilance, the Federation had never relaxed its surveillance of the Gary Corridor and the Night Scorpion Nebula. Even when the resources of the crystal mines were seriously exhausted, they still maintained a powerful fleet and stationed it there for a long time. However, this time, in order to completely crush the Imperium's expedition strategy, the Federation had moved the main force of the Federal fleet to the desolate space zone outside the West Woods. Because of the good news, the atmosphere of the private dinner in the president's residence became even more lively. Only the president's daughter, who was sitting next to Sulu, remained silent. The 12-year-old girl lowered her head and ate quietly. Now and then, she would subconsciously draw on the white tablecloth with her silver chopsticks, as if she was thinking about something. After dinner, the hot tea was served. Madam President knew that the men still had topics to talk about, so she smiled and exchanged a few words with Sulu before preparing to take her daughter upstairs to do her homework. When the president's daughter walked to the entrance of the dining room, she suddenly looked at Sulu and then revealed a pleading expression to her father. President Pabre smiled and nodded gently. President Pabre and Sulu were the only ones left at the dining table of the official residence. Those solemn-looking staff members of the Special Task Force, dressed in formal black suits, were nowhere to be found. The president's residence is a side courtyard left behind after the palace was demolished. After the election, the first day I moved in, I was stunned by the luxurious decorations inside. From this, you can imagine how exaggerated the palaces that those emperors lived in were when they were still alive. President Pabre said slowly as he looked around the room at the famous oil paintings and wood carvings of the Du River. He picked up the silver cutlery in his hand, looked at Sulu, and continued, "The royal family uses these expensive cutlery, so naturally they have to distinguish themselves from the common people at the bottom. The cost of their meals is so high that the poor can never imitate them, so they can't eat like them." Sulu listened carefully, not knowing what the president wanted to say to him, or if it was just purely personal. The people who want the election process to be expensive the most are the powerful, so that the poor can't get the right to be elected. The people who want the judicial process to be expensive the most are the powerful, so that the poor can't win the case. The people who want the media to be expensive the most are also the powerful, so that the poor can't get the right to speak. President Pabre said with a serious expression, "The three elements that run through the spirit of the Charter, democracy, justice, and freedom of speech, all have a common characteristic in this environment, and that is the high cost of the process. So these democracy, justice, and freedom can easily become the democracy, justice, and freedom of the powerful. I couldn't become the president of the Federation without the support of people like Macho in the back of the mountain. But all the funds for the first election I participated in came from the people who trusted me. You may not be able to imagine how many disabled miners took out their meager compensation. That was the primary election for the state councillor of Nashi in Donglin." President Prabal furrowed his brows, but there was a sincere smile on his tanned face. He was probably reminiscing about his life, which was difficult but full of ideals. "I also was a soldier in Donglin." Sulu reacted, scratched his head, and changed his words. "I know what the stones of Donglin are like when they're angry. In fact, I've always felt that your personality is very similar to the people in my hometown." The president laughed, and then the smile immediately disappeared. He said seriously, "It is because I remember the people who raised money to help me in the election that I have never forgotten that I am an elected president." President Pabre had a pair of thick and charming lips, and his deep voice was full of firmness. "So every decision I make must protect the interests of the entire Federation as much as possible." He looked at Sulu and extended a finger. He said in a heavy tone, "Remember, it is the entire Federation, not the combination of politicians and powerful people. It has to be specific to every independent citizen." The entire Federation knew that the president was an eloquent speaker when he was a lawyer, but after entering politics, he became a leader with gentle words but very influential words. At this time, listening to these powerful words face to face, although Sulu was still silent, his heart was greatly touched. Everyone has their own position. The war against the empire has, to a large extent, eased the opposing feelings between the various levels of the Federation and unified our position. However, the military operation in the West Woods has achieved complete victory. Where should the Federation go in the future? Sulu did not think that he had the right to discuss the future direction of the entire Federation with the President of the Federation, so he subconsciously thought that President Pabre's words were a heavy question to himself and not to him. However, after a moment of silence, he was surprised to find that the President had been looking at him calmly. "I am an engineer, and now you can say that I am a soldier." "I don't know much about politics," he said with difficulty. Everything he said was the truth. "I can't give any opinions on such a big matter." President Pabre laughed and lightly patted the surface of the table. He spread his hands and said, "Then why don't you talk about this war from a military point of view?" Sulu felt a little nervous. It should be known that the middle-aged man sitting opposite him was the most powerful figure in the entire Federation. At this moment, he could not help but think of the conversation in the restaurant in Sunset State. He could not understand why important figures like the President and Commander Zhong would value his opinion so much. Suddenly, he thought of a possibility. His thick eyebrows raised slightly. He looked at the President and said very seriously and sincerely, "Mr. President, my opinion does not represent the opinion of the old man in Philadelphia." Half an hour later. Although the reasons for our judgment are different, the conclusion we reached is the same. The people of the Empire will never give up the idea of invading the Federation. President Pabre said worriedly, "The Night Scorpion Nebula and Gary Corridor cannot block those cruel enemies forever. Even during my term of office, or even when you and I are alive, the Empire may be isolated for 6 years. But one day, the Empire will break through that line of defense and enter the territory of the Federation. The Federation wants to develop. The people need peace and the right to be free from fear. We must completely defeat the Empire. Right now, the Federation has a strategic advantage. We must turn this advantage into victory while it is still in our hands. This means that the Federation must enter the territory of the Empire. Moreover, it cannot be delayed." Su Lu furrowed his brows. The President's judgment was not surprising. In fact, from the ceremony a few days ago and the propaganda of the Federation as a whole, it was inevitable that the Federation would launch a new round of attacks on the Empire. Why did Mr. Pabre look so worried? "My worry is that many people in the upper echelons of the Federation do not want the war to be expanded." The President seemed to know what he was thinking and said in a low voice, "They enjoy a privileged life in the Federation. How can they be willing to sacrifice their great interests? Moreover, in their opinion, the people of the Empire will never be able to pass through the space channel. Or as I said before, at least they will not be able to do so while they are alive. Now that the situation in the West Woods is settled, war is no longer an inevitable choice. Under such circumstances, the government and the military are facing a lot of pressure. This pressure cannot be revealed in the light of victory, but once they find a chance, they will stop the Federation from invading the territory at all costs." "They, who are they?" "The families you know, the members of parliament at all levels, the rich but emotionless businessmen, and even the Zhong family in the West Woods do not want the war to be expanded again. What I am curious about is, what is the basis of Lady Tai's decision to support me so firmly?" President Pabre said in a slightly mocking tone, "There are too many people who are against entering the territory of the Empire. I can only say that, just like George Carlin once said, anyone who opposes changing the status quo, is immersed in the stale reality, and even forgets the foresight that their wisdom should produce, is a group of people with vested interests." "What can I do?" Su Lu asked after a moment of silence. President Pabre looked at the young man across the table, as if he was looking at his stubborn self from many years ago. Back then, for the interests of the people at the bottom, he insisted on fighting a class action lawsuit against the giant enterprises of the Federation. As a result, he was fired by the largest law firm in Hong Kong, and the rented apartment caught fire mysteriously. He could only drag the suitcase he borrowed from the guard, drag those heavy legal documents, and hold his newly married wife, stroll on the cold streets in the early autumn, and then sit on a bench in the park for a night. At that time, he was smiling, wasn't he? President Pabre slightly narrowed his eyes and looked at the simple face of the young man across the table. After thinking for a long time, he gave up his original plan and said with a smile, "Please send a message to Philadelphia for me. I want to ask the general to make a statement." Chapter 540. The current situation seemed to be bright, but who would have thought that there were dark waves flowing underneath? After hearing Mr. President's words, Su Lu fell into silence. The god of war, Li Pifu, was an anomaly in the political system of the Federation. Even though he had been living in Philadelphia for many years, no one dared to ignore his existence. In the hearts of hundreds of millions of people, he had an incomparably high status. Although he did not deliberately control the voice of countless subordinates, in fact, he controlled the voice of countless subordinates. If this old man casually said a few words by the lakeside, all the noises in the Federation would disappear. Even those families who had inherited the imperial court's legacy and had extremely strong influence in the shadows of history had to politely avoid him in these few decades, again and again. From this point of view, it was natural that Mr. President hoped to get the support of the Lees of Philadelphia through him to complete the Federation's plan to attack the homeland of the Empire. But for some reason, Sulu always felt that something was wrong. Maybe it was because Mr. President had said too much at this official residence banquet, but in the end, he had asked for too little. In fact, in his opinion, Mr. President should be able to find a better middleman to invite the old man from the lakeside of Philadelphia, such as his political partner, Lady Tai, who did not worry about the back of the mountain. Sulu looked at Mr. President on the opposite side of the table, and his thoughts drifted to other places. The most common and the most complicated political affairs in human history were indeed a bit too complicated for him. Until now, he still couldn't clearly sort out the many clues of this banquet conversation, and couldn't make his own judgment. However, he still wanted to help the big man on the opposite side of the table. A few days ago, Shi Qinghai said that he had a personality charm, but in his opinion, Mr. President had a kind of real personality charm. Maybe it was because they were both Donglin stones in their minds, or maybe it was because of what happened in the election, or maybe it was because Mr. President had shown a way of doing things that was absolutely different from ordinary politicians since he took office, but Sulu was definitely leaning towards Mr. President from a rational and emotional point of view. Actually, my relationship with the old man isn't as close as everyone thinks. At least, I'm definitely not his illegitimate child. Even Sulu himself did not find it funny. He scratched the back of his head awkwardly, and then his expression gradually calmed down. He looked at President Pabre and said seriously, "I will find a way to convey your thoughts to Lord War God." Very good. Mr. President's voice was deep and his smile was sincere. Next, I have another favor to ask of you. Su Li's expression turned serious as he said, "Please instruct me." It's not an instruction. It's just a request from a father. President Pabre laughed and took a piece of paper and an ink pen. He pushed them in front of Sulu and said with great interest, "My daughter wants very much to have the autograph of a war hero of the Federation, but she is too embarrassed to ask for it in person." Sulu took the paper and the pen in surprise. Feeling that his cheeks were a little hot, he lowered his head and signed his name carefully, wishing the silent first daughter of the Federation a happy life and a happy smile. "How's Miss Padil's health recently?" he asked with concern. Everyone knew that the president's biological daughter had autism when she was a child. "Much better, but she still doesn't want to talk and looks at the TV screen every day," President Pabre said with a smile. Recently, she's been obsessed with the documentary called Team 7. Victory. Victory. The two words full of power echoed on all the inhabited planets of the Federation. Even the mining engineers who endured the cruel space environment on the remote mining planets had painted the words on the enormous and heavy engineering mechas. It was needless to say that the young students who traveled happily in the bright spring were repeating everything that happened on the front line with high frequency and looking forward to the greater victory that was to come. In different positions, the perspective of considering things was naturally completely different. The ordinary people of the Federation yearned for one victory after another, while the big shots who could really influence the direction of the Federation stood on their own standpoints and made decisions that were in line with their own interests. War consumed a lot of resources and money, which would put tremendous pressure on the Federation's economic system. If they continued to attack the homeland of the Imperium, how long could the Federation's production capacity withstand the wartime logistics supply? How long could the military enterprises add zeros to the government's debt last? Would the terrifying amount of energy allocated in advance be repaid in the war? Would the continuation of the war bring any real benefits to the Federation? Or in other words, would it bring any benefits to them? However, what President Pabre was worried about in the banquet in the official residence did not happen. Although the old man on the shore of Feicheng Lake was still silent, in the current frenzied atmosphere, those families who had opposing opinions on attacking the homeland of the Imperium, those rich capitalists and the politicians they supported, were also silent. Only silence. All the states of the Federation organized a grand welcome ceremony to welcome the brave soldiers who returned from the front line. The programs on the Federation's TV and those private TV stations were full of interviews with the soldiers and realistic and cruel battlefield recordings. Various entertainment channels began to broadcast a large number of military-themed TV series. Channel 23 of the Federation directly began to replay the first episode of Full Metal Rush. In order to cater to the psychological needs of the people to celebrate the victory, from the political world to the literary world, to the academic world, and so on, everyone was doing the same. However, all of this could not stop the people of the Federation from aiming the remote control in their hands at the news channel of the Federation on this night. Because it was time for the annual Nebula Awards ceremony, tonight was the live broadcast of the awards ceremony of the Literature and Art category. The Nebula Award was an official award of the Federation, and the award covered all aspects of society. In previous years, the most eye-catching awards were undoubtedly the Literature and Art category, which was full of stars, but it was only eye-catching. In terms of importance, it was definitely not as important as the academic awards that had been given out 3 days ago. However, the atmosphere tonight was obviously different. Those cynics who were used to being indifferent to the TV series that anesthetized the ignorant, those scholars who only knew how to bury themselves in the laboratory, and those who were immersed in virtual life on the internet all put down what they were doing and sat in front of the TV screen with excitement. Because they all wanted to know the answer. They wanted to know how many awards the documentary, which had moved the entire Federation, would win, and whether it could break the records set in the first year of the Full Metal Rush. More importantly, they wanted to see if the soldiers in the documentary would come to the scene of the awards ceremony. They wanted to see what the roaring, angry, silent, and sad characters looked like when they returned home. The documentary, Team 7, which was produced by the Jinxing Documentary Film Factory of the Ministry of Defense and aired exclusively on the news channel of the Federation, was nominated for all the awards it could be nominated for, including Best Photography, Best Editing, Best Soundtrack, Best Film and Television Song, Best Soundtrack, Best Female Singer, Best Director. This documentary was not nominated for the Best Original Script or Adapted Script award because it was a real story, and no one could write such a realistic script. Team 7 was also not nominated for any acting award because there were no actors in it, only real soldiers. Including almost all the nominations, Team 7 was naturally nominated for the Best Documentary Film Award, but what shocked the entire Federation and more than 3,000 members of the jury was that Team 7 was actually nominated for the Best Film Award. A documentary was actually nominated for the Best Film Award, which was something that had never happened in the long history of the Nebula Awards. After the shortlist was released, the Federation's press was in an uproar, but strangely, there was no harsh criticism or ridicule. There was only a wave of amazement and puzzlement. A member of the jury admitted in an interview with the official broadcasting agency anonymously that he had indeed filled in the name of Team 7 on the list of nominees for the Best Movie. However, at that time, he had been moved by the documentary and suddenly had a strong impulse. He did not expect that more members of the jury would do the same thing. The George Carlin Foundation Arts Center in the Southern District of the capital officially became the venue of the Federation's Nebula Awards ceremony 2 years ago. This decision was made by President Pabre himself. At first, it was to appease the angry protesting students, but now it had become the shortest, historical tradition of the Federation, and no one was not used to it. Outside the large building of the Foundation Literature and Arts Center, thousands of people were excitedly waiting outside the cordon. Their eyes were collectively fixed on the huge light screen above the building. Those blazing eyes seemed to want to melt the picture on the light screen. The red carpet ceremony was over. They had already fainted from the excitement of cheering for their favorite stars, but at this moment, they were still waiting here, happily waiting for the results of the awards ceremony. It seemed that tonight, the entire federation was looking forward to the results. Inside the central building, a light blue and soft three-dimensional light enveloped the spacious stage. It was empty. There were no award-winning actors or enthusiastic hosts. There was only a pillar of light formed by the blue light, and on top of it, words slowly appeared that left a deep impression. These words were the speech written by General Miles in the last episode of the documentary, Team 7. The art museum, which could accommodate thousands of people, was already full. The gorgeous stars of the Federation and the giants of the film and television industry were sitting in their seats. They were not smiling and leaning around to greet people as usual. Instead, they were looking at the stage seriously. It was quiet on and off the stage. Only the breathing of thousands of people could be heard. In this silence and waiting, the melodious sound of a zither came. It was faint and beautiful, falling from the sky and falling on people's clothes and hair, adding a sense of harmony. In the sound of the zither, a beautiful girl that no one expected appeared in the blue light column. She gently clenched her fists and looked at the light in the sky, as if she was looking into the distance. She began to sing softly. Jian Shuier, the national girl who had disappeared from the public for a long time, sang the ending song of the documentary, Team 7, a mixture of sadness and sunshine, opening the curtain of the Nebula Awards ceremony. Chapter 541. Listening to the gentle singing in the large venue, Su Li's nervous body gradually relaxed. He loosened his grip on his sunglasses and quietly wiped his sweat on his military pants. At this time, he was sitting in the best seat in the audience below the stage. Around him were all celebrities that he could only see on TV. Nowadays, he was not nervous because of this, but it was his first time attending this kind of event, so it was inevitable that he felt very uncomfortable. Being a military officer or an engineer was not compatible with this brilliant world of literature and art. He had never thought of attending the Nebula Awards ceremony. However, as a war hero deliberately promoted by the federal government, he had to do some role-playing. Even Xiaoqing, who was as cold and proud as a snow plum, had accepted an exclusive interview with the federal television station and was asked a lot of stupid and boring questions about the relationship between music and tactical deduction. During the interview, Du Xiaoqing frowned and answered that music was just a personal hobby. It had nothing to do with tactical deduction. The host was stunned for 3 whole seconds. Su Lu was Du Xiaoqing. He did not have a realistic pursuit of a military career, so he did not care about the rules of the war hero game. According to his personality, he should not have come tonight. However, Director Breen personally called the president's official residence and the Ministry of Defense gave him a clear order. When he thought of the president's worries in the official residence that night, he vaguely understood something, so in the end, he still came. The song on the stage was still going on, and the simple yet touching lyrics flowed into the ears of the audience like water. Su Lu listened carefully, thinking that the guys from Group 7 should have been brought over by the Department of Defense. However, the award ceremony was too dark, and there was a sea of audience, so he couldn't find where those guys were arranged to sit. In the front right was Bai Ziming, the director and producer chosen by the Venus Documentary Film Studio. Because of the success of the documentary Group 7, he became famous and occupied a very important position in the Federation's literary world today, just like his position at the moment. In the back right was an acquaintance, Sister Tong, whom he had not seen in a long time. However, the seat on the right had always been empty. Su Lu had already guessed something from these details, so he was not too surprised by Jian Shuiyer's surprising appearance on the stage. It was just one song. In the blue light screen that was like the background of the universe, Jian Shuiyer, who was wearing a soft linen dress, left quietly. She did not greet the guests below the stage or the audience in front of the TV screen. Just like her voice in the ending song, she entered in perfect harmony and softly, and then silently disappeared, as if she had never appeared. The lights of the awards ceremony gradually brightened. Sulu finally felt the curious and suspicious gazes of the VIPs around him. He lowered his head slightly and put on the sunglasses. Wearing sunglasses indoors was something that only those middle-aged artistic men would do. Even those middle-aged artistic men would smile or reveal their true colors in such a grand award ceremony. Therefore, when he put on the sunglasses, he attracted more attention. The guests around him began to whisper. Several female stars had excited expressions on their faces. They probably guessed his identity. After all, whether it was in the news or in the documentary, people had only seen him wearing sunglasses. They were very familiar with his outfit. The appearance of the female host of the awards ceremony on the stage calmed down the commotion in the audience. After all, it was a live broadcast. The guests had to pay attention to their manners. The female host of the awards ceremony was called Ko Ining. She was the Best Actress of the Federation's Autumn Literary Award 2 years ago. It was during that awards ceremony that she was so excited that she cried but still did not lose her humor. She won the praise and love of many people in the Federation. She also won the appreciation of the director of the Federation's news channel. The news channel tailor-made a brand new late-night talk show for her and successfully pushed her to the position of host. Everyone, I am Ko Ining. Welcome to the awards ceremony of the Nebula Award for Arts and Culture. The awards ceremony is a process that makes people in this industry excited, distressed, and even tormented. Everyone, welcome to the battlefield without the sound of guns. There was a burst of laughter in the audience. But in my opinion, the real sound of guns might win the biggest victory tonight. Ko Ining was wearing a light black low-cut dress. She was very charming. She gently brushed her hair and said casually, pointing out the biggest focus of today's awards ceremony, the documentary. She continued to speak to the entire audience in the Federation. When I received the only award in my life, I once shouted to the air, Miss Jian Shuier, come back, because people need you. In the end, it seems that the heavens heard my call, so, she really did come back. Ko Ining turned to the empty electric beam curtain wall behind her and shrugged exaggeratedly. Unfortunately, she left again. There was a burst of laughter in the audience. Of course, we all know that Miss Jian Shuier wouldn't stand on the stage again because she heard my call. Ko Ining turned to the audience and said with a smile, we all know why she appeared tonight. It's because of a documentary that made many people laugh and cry. The director of this documentary, Mr. Bai Ziming, is sitting below. Mr. Bai Ziming, you don't need to stand up and greet everyone, because I believe you need to thank a lot of people tonight. I'm worried that you will finish your thank you speech too early and then stand on the stage without saying anything, wasting the precious speaking time of the news channel. Ko Ining looked seriously at the audience below the stage and said, which naturally attracted a burst of laughter. The opening speech seems a bit too long, but the director of the news channel allowed me to speak freely, actually less than you think. The amiable and interesting hostess shrugged and said, actually, the reason why I'm talking about Miss Jian Shuier and the documentary, Team 7, is because I want to announce the winner of the Best Film Song Award today. The winner is, well, this song doesn't seem to have an official name, it is, the ending song of Team 7. Songwriter and singer, Miss Jian Shuier. The venue was quiet for a while, as if they didn't expect the climax of the awards ceremony to appear from the beginning. Then a burst of thunderous applause broke out. This applause was for the legendary Jian Shuier, who had already left the world, and for the documentary that had won countless praises. Nebula Award for Best Cinematography in the Arts category, Team 7, photographer Huang Taiheng. Best Soundtrack, Team 7, Federation Golden Star Orchestra, composer, Zheng Erz. Best Documentary, Team 7, Best Editing, as everyone expected, but still shocked everyone, the documentary, Team 7, swept away all the awards it was nominated for. Although Team 7 didn't set a record for the number of awards it was nominated for, if it could win the final 2 awards, then the number of awards it won would surpass Full Metal Tide a few years ago. It would write a glory that was difficult to replicate in the history of the Nebula Awards. And looking at the awards before, who would doubt the final result? In front of this amazing momentum, the outstanding actors and superstars who won acting awards lost all their glory. Best Director, by Ziming. The loudest applause since the beginning of the award ceremony rang out. Thousands of people watched the man running up the stage and praised him from the bottom of their hearts. Documentaries were not easy to shoot, and it was even more difficult to shoot a war documentary. Bai Ziming and his team endured the fierce artillery fire for such a long time in the difficult front line, it was really respectable. Moreover, this war documentary didn't fall into the inherent pattern of tragic or heroic. Countless seemingly ordinary details of military life and the unique angle of the footage made up the unique charm of this documentary, and it made people in the Federation fall for it. I'm really nervous. Bai Ziming lowered his head with difficulty and said tremblingly into the vertical microphone, even more nervous than when I just entered Team 7, and was almost beaten into a meat patty by Lieutenant Colonel Su Li's people. What he said was not a joke, it was the truth. However, the guests at the awards ceremony and the hundreds of millions of people in front of the TV screen laughed loudly. This is the 4th time I'm on stage today. Although I value the Best Director award the most, the editing and dubbing awards in front of me, like the host said, used up all my gratitude list. I have already disturbed my Father in heaven, I can't disturb my father's father, or even my ancestors. After the nervousness, Bai Ziming began to get excited. He said with a trembling voice, "So, I'm just going to briefly talk about the reason and feelings of shooting this documentary." He raised the award with his right hand and said to the guests below the stage, I asked them, "Why are you fighting?" They said, "Because the enemy is there." Someone asked me, why am I taking the risk to shoot with the hostility and incomprehension of Team 7 at the beginning? My answer is, because the soldiers who are fighting in blood for everyone to live a peaceful and happy life in the Federation are there. Hearing Bai Ziming's emotional words, the awards ceremony quieted down. A solemn atmosphere enveloped the entire venue. Everyone was moved. At this moment, a sarcastic voice disturbed the atmosphere. In an inconspicuous corner of the auditorium, someone shouted angrily, "You stole my line. I'm going to say it again when I'm on stage." There was a huge uproar in the venue. The guests looked for the source of the voice in shock. Some of the more impatient people even stood up from their seats. The director of the news channel quickly adjusted the lights and illuminated the dark corner. There were dozens of Federation soldiers sitting neatly there. They were wearing dark green formal military uniforms, and on their chests was a variegated medal with the number of the 17th Mechanic Division of the Federation's 1st Military Region. They were tall and straight, but their expressions were obviously a bit awkward because of the shout of one of their companions. Team 7. It's Team 7. So, they really came to the award ceremony. Thousands of guests looked at the soldiers in the corner in surprise and talked excitedly. Then, without knowing who started it, applause sounded like heavy rain, mixed with cheerful laughter and exciting whistles. For a moment, the entire venue was in a riot. Chapter 542. Su Lu knew it was Lan Xiaolong talking nonsense the moment he heard the voice. He did not turn around to look for his companions. Instead, he lowered his head and rubbed between his eyebrows. This action was not to hide his inner awkwardness, or to pretend not to know this person as often described in novels to avoid embarrassment. It was just that he was thinking about something interesting. Major Lan Xiaolong's sarcastic tone was something Su Lu and the members of Group 7 were already familiar with. They would not be surprised even if he appeared at the Federation's grandest awards ceremony. However, his sudden speech attracted the attention of the audience and the cameras, pushing Group 7 into the spotlight. Naturally, it made it difficult for the guests and the TV audience to feel disgusted by him. Sulu felt that other than the guy's personality, there was something else behind that shout. It was a very skillful publicity tactic. The Ministry of Defense transferred Lan Xiaolong to Group 7 in order to prepare for the reconstruction of the new 17th Division. It seemed that the Ministry of Defense had given him a new mission this time. The audience cheered. Only he, who was wearing sunglasses, was quietly thinking about this question. After a long time, a smile appeared on his face. He realized with mixed feelings that he, an orphan of Donglin, was no longer as innocent as he used to be after so many years on the capital ring. On the stage, Bai Ziming, who was in high spirits and felt like crying, shouted at Major Lan Xiaolong, who was below the stage. Laughter rang out in the spacious venue from time to time. It wasn't until the host reminded them that the awards ceremony could continue. When Sulu looked up, the guests for the grand finale, the president of the Federation's Academy of Arts and Letters and the president of the Federation's TV station, were already on the stage. They began to introduce the list of finalists on the huge screen that occupied the entire wall of the building. It was extremely quiet on and off the stage. Hundreds of millions of people were waiting excitedly on and off the television. The white-haired dean of the Federal Academy of Arts and Letters smiled and said nothing more. He began to slowly recite the speech he had just drafted an hour ago. After the awards ceremony, the Federation's news media found out that the speech that left a deep impression on many people was actually written by Mr. Bob, the chief editor of the Capital Special District Daily and a famous independent journalist of the Federation. This is a great era where a great fleet is on an expedition to the brilliant universe. Countless brave warriors are advancing one after another. Their strong survival and glorious sacrifice reflect each other. Behind the great era, the price of protein meat rises again, the uncle next door loses his job, the business of the underground casino deteriorates, the guardians increase, the aunt next door gets a raise, and the daughter worries about her poor results in the spring exam and her pocket money. Whether it is a great era or a small time, there are brave people and cowards, they are happy because of victory, sad because of failure, and angry because of many things. The only difference between the two is the attitude in the face of difficulties and power. When the brave are enraged, they cast their own flesh and blood into a sharp sword, unsheathing it and facing a stronger opponent. When the cowards are angry, they build a black brick of their emotions and sneak behind the weak. In an incorrigible society, there must be many heroes who stare at the children, and these children grow up under the stare at other children, and then hold the black brick behind their backs tightly. The selection committee chose this film with great courage because this film tells us how lucky we are. The Thai family really has a lot of foundations. Bai Yulan took out a cigarette and lit it. He used his thumb to push away the thin hair in front of his forehead and said softly, "Since you're used to speaking in this obscure way, then I can explain it again. I am very rich now." He raised his head, looked at the man and said expressionlessly, "The first time the boss met me, he gave me 20 million renminbi. Although I spend a lot of money, and the boss doesn't count the money he spends, but after these 2 years, I still have more than 10 million renminbi left. If I use it sparingly, it should be enough in the future." The slightly chubby middle-aged man's eyes were slightly cold. He immediately smiled and said, "It is indeed a lot of money, but I still have the authority to issue this kind of amount. You must know that I am in charge of the account signing, and I directly serve Secretary Shen. You still refuse to sign this account, I am under a lot of pressure. Can you tell me who your boss is?" From the beginning to the end, this foundation's agent didn't have any threatening words or strong actions, but his understatement revealed that the power he served was absolutely superior and powerful in the Federation. Bai Yulan's thin eyebrows slightly raised. Her face was covered with smoke. She smiled and asked, "You are new, right?" The slightly chubby middle-aged man was stunned. "The lieutenant colonel hiding behind the crowd is my boss." Bai Yulan pointed at the awards ceremony on the TV and said, "My human relations is with the 17th Division, which used to be the 7th Division." It was quiet in the ward. Only the sound of the thick leaves rustling in the night wind could be heard. The fund agent took out a silk handkerchief and wiped the sweat on his forehead again. He said in a hoarse voice, "I'm sorry, I just took over the business last month. There might be some mistakes in the connection. Sorry to disturb you." The man neatly walked to the door of the ward. When he was about to leave, he politely said, "I don't have the authority to deal with your business. It may be handled by Secretary Shin himself." Bai Yulan didn't pay attention to him. She turned around and looked out of the window. She flicked the cigarette ash onto the thick green leaves that stretched towards the window lattice. Chapter 543. On this night, the people on the night shift couldn't watch the Nebula Awards ceremony. Naturally, it was unfortunate. A middle-aged female nurse in the corridor outside the ward had a troubled expression on her face, but it had nothing to do with this. She looked at the smoke coming out from the crack of the door and frowned. She seemed to be hesitating whether or not to push the door open and stop the other party. As medical staff, they knew very well what kind of place the Army General Hospital was. An ordinary old man in a blue and white hospital gown strolling under the shade of a tree was an old military commander with outstanding military achievements. The woman waiting in the obstetrics and gynecology department was the daughter-in-law of the New Moon Base's commander. Big shots in the political world often came to the hospital for treatment or rest. In this place, any ordinary person could be in existence that they absolutely couldn't afford to offend. The officer smoking in the ward didn't seem to have any background, but he was able to book the intensive care unit for so many years and hire 6 special nurses. This kind of eccentric person with a lot of money, she didn't dare to offend him. At this moment, a young female nurse in her 20s walked over. Seeing the smoke in the ward, she frowned and asked unhappily, "He's smoking again?" On the television screen, Lan Xiaolong, who was wearing a neat military uniform, was speaking as an unofficial spokesperson to the guests below the stage and the audience outside the camera. He represented the entire Group 7 and said those golden words that made people's blood boil and goosebumps rise. Bai Magnolia, who was sitting by the bed, had a cigarette in his mouth. He turned around and looked at his old father who was sleeping soundly. He suddenly took out the cigarette and blew a puff of smoke in his old father's face. He had a strange smile on his face as he thought to himself, "I wonder if you can smell the smell of this cigarette when you're unconscious." Bai Magnolia's ladylike smell was the true embodiment of his strange personality. He never cared about what others thought of him. Naturally, he didn't think that blowing a smoke ring in the face of an unconscious and seriously ill old man would be strange and disrespectful. When the young nurse opened the door to the ward, she saw this scene. Her beautiful eyebrows furrowed and she scolded him in a low voice, "No smoking." Bai Yulan's gaze turned cold, as if a sharp knife had been unsheathed. When she turned around and saw that the person who had spoken was her, the sharpness in her eyes gradually disappeared. The young nurse had been in charge of this ward for more than 3 years. In these 3 years, he had never asked for her name. He had never even thought of asking for her name. He was too lazy to interact with the ordinary people in this society. However, perhaps it was because he was in a good mood tonight, or perhaps it was because of some other reason, he suddenly opened his mouth and said, "Have you always been this fierce?" The young nurse was stunned. Everyone in the hospital knew that this delicate yet frightening man never spoke to anyone other than to pay money and ask the doctor about his condition. She had never heard his voice before, but today, he actually spoke. How am I fierce?" The young nurse suddenly became nervous and stuttered. Bai Yulan smiled and continued to watch. On the TV screen, those familiar companions were standing on the stage uneasily. Standing under the spotlight, Su Lu stood silently in the crowd as usual. However, today, he was not wearing sunglasses. His small eyes were full of spirit, sincere and amiable. At this moment, there must be countless people in the Federation staring at this plain and ordinary face, Bai Yulan thought silently. Perhaps those people were like her, staring at the national girl behind him who wore a white veil that covered most of her face, just like when she was singing. 3 years ago, when I brought this guy to this hospital for the first time, you yelled at him to put out his cigarette. Bai Yulan pointed at Su Lu on the TV screen and said, in the Federation, there are fewer and fewer people who dare to do that to him, so I think that you are a very fierce woman by nature. The young nurse was stunned. She turned around to look at the TV screen and said doubtfully, I have seen this person before. 2 years ago, he came to visit your family several times. When Bai Yulan heard this, she suddenly became silent. Her fingers that were holding the cigarette froze. His name is Su Lu, and he is my current commanding officer. The young nurse looked at the TV screen and finally understood what the man beside her was trying to say. She covered her mouth in disbelief to prevent herself from crying out. Immediately after, a sentence sounded in the ward, causing the young and beautiful nurse to become even more shocked. Bai Yulan used the hand that was holding the cigarette to lift the black hair in front of her eyes. She looked at the nurse and smiled. What is your name? Are you willing to marry me? Countless light years away from S1, an extremely distant place that had long surpassed the Federation's territory. It was a place that was even more difficult to reach than the Bermuda Triangle. At the end of a long galaxy surrounded by countless stars, it was a place that was often described as the time period of 7 years. It was the left sky star region where the Empire was located. In the tallest building on Tianjing, an entire wall of LED screens was broadcasting the Federation's news channel. At this moment, it was the climax of the Nebula Award ceremony. The stage was filled with the excited members of Group 7 and some people beside them. No one would have thought that the Federation's TV signal would be able to travel so far across the galaxy and appear in the Empire's palace. Even more so, no one would have thought that the middle-aged man sitting in front of the sunflower oil painting screen would be silently watching all of this. The normal standard TV signal extended to the Empire's star region through the Gary Corridor space channel. Although it took the opportunity to travel through the long universe, the signal degradation was extremely serious. The Empire spent a lot of effort to successfully restore the data of these signals and send them to the military, the Royal Intelligence Agency, and the Imperial Palace that was held high in the clouds by giant alloy pillars. However, this kind of data restoration was still not complete. In order to prevent the mosaics from damaging the great middle-aged man's vision, the technical department used rendering technology to fill in the color blocks. However, in this way, the TV image seemed to be coated with a layer of light, appearing somewhat hazy. It was as if another world was illusory, as if it could not be touched with one's hand. In front of the exaggerated and golden sunflower oil painting screen, the highest ruler of the Empire still only left the lowly servant and the young officer kneeling on the ground with his back. This back was still valiant and filled with a chilling sense of oppression. The Emperor of the Empire stared at the scene of the awards ceremony on the screen of light. He stared at the national girl at the back of the crowd whose beautiful hair and face were completely hidden in the shadow of her hat. He stared at her left wrist and was silent for a long time before he suddenly sighed softly. His left hand rested on the back of the soft chair, slowly and silently tapping on the expensive Ladei calf leather. Below his fingertips was a vine stained with old bloodstains. I've always been thinking that since the Expeditionary Army was unable to capture this little girl, I don't know if I'll ever see her appear in front of me again in my lifetime. Of course, whether she's dead or alive. The Emperor of the Empire spoke in a calm tone, but his words were filled with a strong sense of unwillingness and mockery. Huai Chaosher, who was kneeling on one knee behind the screen, could only remain silent. He did not need to be like the other officials and generals, constantly fawning over the Emperor's emotions. The Federation was under the protection of the glory of the Charter. Even though the military's research had already achieved a breakthrough, he still did not dare to promise that he could infiltrate the Federation, capture or kill this girl, and bring back the bracelet. I approve of your plan. The middle-aged man in front of the screen said calmly, "The expeditionary army was completely wiped out. The people of the Federation will have to pay a corresponding price for this. I will not ask for interest from them, but I will definitely make them suffer." "Yes, Your Majesty." Huai Chaoshu thought of the plan jointly formulated by the military and the Royal Intelligence Agency. Even though he was calm and strong, he could not help but feel his heart beat faster. Walking out of the Imperial Palace, his military boots stepped on the self-propelled track leading to the military. His thin, even short figure was silent the entire way. When he passed through the security gate to undergo the strict inspection, there was not the slightest expression on his face. This was because he had been thinking about a certain question these days. He was thinking about the true reason behind the Emperor's decision back then. That female star of the Federation called Jian Shue'er, what was so special about her that was worth paying attention to? What was the significance of the bracelet on her wrist? Regarding this point, the Emperor had never discussed it, and no one dared to ask him. Thousands of Empire soldiers had shed blood in foreign lands because of this inexplicable reason. Huai Caoshu's emotions were not as calm as they appeared on the surface. Previously, he had also watched the broadcast of the Federation's awards ceremony. He had no interest in this kind of ceremony that was full of the Federation's unique hypocrisy and propaganda flavor. All of his attention was on Jian Shue'er. He also noticed the young lieutenant colonel of the Federation in front of Jian Shue'er. According to the Royal Intelligence Agency's intelligence, this person should be a war hero that the federal military focused on cultivating. He should have a complicated relationship with the Empire's biggest enemy in Philadelphia. However, the Emperor and him did not pay too much attention to Su Lu. For people of high status like them, this kind of person was really too insignificant. Deep underground of the Empire's military headquarters. It is my honor to report that the test of the new mecha has been completed. Regarding this, we are very grateful that you personally tested the mecha. A scientist's expression was humble but extremely excited as he reported. Hearing this very important good news, Huai Chaoshu, who had a cold expression, finally showed a trace of a smile. The Minister of Military Affairs, Prince Bo Wu, looked at him with a smile and said, "The success of the joint microengine technology in reality is due to your great contribution. His Majesty has given the naming rights to you. It seems that before you depart, you should quickly think of a better-sounding name." The entire universe knew that His Majesty the Emperor favored this young officer. Prince Bo Wu did not feel any jealousy in his heart. In fact, other than this young officer, there was no one more suitable to name the most advanced mecha of the Empire. Wolf Fang. Huai Chaoshu did not think too much and directly answered. The excited researchers were stunned. The chief scientist of the mecha development said with a trembling voice, "Although it is quite common, it is very suitable for the new mecha's combat style. You don't have to explain. I know this name is very common." Huai Chaoshu narrowed his eyes and said, "But in my opinion, mecha are used for battle. The name does not matter. P.S. I've been writing seriously recently." "I know. I didn't want to ask for votes, but I felt that it would look much better to be in the top 10 of the monthly votes list. That's why I'm seriously asking for votes. I still have some left, so please give me a few. Thank you very much. PS2, I seriously recommend Skeleton's new book, Arms Storm. I should have released it many days ago, but I was so busy that I completely forgot about it. It's a very popular book, and it has always been the #1 on the new book list. If I were to release it now, it would be a bit awkward. I hope he also forgot about it. Ha, here is the official advertising message." Wang Tong was about to embark on a youthful and beautiful university life, but what awaited him was the contract to sell himself to Norton. Norton was attacked by a large number of Zergs, and its defense was instantly reduced to nothing. What awaited Wang Tong was the harsh environment of 5 times the gravity, the ravaging of Zergs, the lack of food and water, isolation and helplessness, the mysterious space crystal, The Power of the Blade Warrior. The 256-point ultimate tactics of the blade. Wang Tong had to fight for his life against an honest and low-level robot and a ghost who was full of nonsense. Skeleton would like to share with you a story filled with passion and passion. The new book, Arms Storm, book number 1562523. Chapter 544. How are the preparations going over there? Huai Chaoshi retracted her gaze from the mecha blueprint and asked her uncle softly, "A year ago, His Majesty allowed me to go over there. I hope you won't try to stop me." The Empire's military minister, Prince Bo Wu, had a strange expression on his face. He looked at him and sighed. Everything is going according to the original plan. There should be no problems with the analysis of the Royal Intelligence Agency and the military department. The key now is that we have to wait for the brave hero bloodline to send back information from the Federation. Still the second target? Huai Chaoshi frowned and asked. That's right. The target is currently debriefing at S1. According to past practice, he will depart for Silin in about a month. Prince Bo Wu said slowly. Li Pifu has been hiding beside Feiqing Lake. He won't appear at that time. If we choose this old man as our target, I'm worried that Keaton's mid-level fleet won't be able to complete their mission. There's no real god in the universe. Hearing the name of the Federation's war god, Huai Caoshi's eyebrows suddenly rose, then she immediately calmed down and said indifferently. Prince Bo Wu had a cold expression on his face. It was rare for him to raise an objection. If he's not a god, how can he erase my father from reality? Huai Chaoshi remained silent. The previous emperor of the empire had been assassinated by Li Bufu on the battlefield. This was the most shocking and humiliating event in the history of the empire. In the face of this fact, even if she hated him to the core, she had to admit that he was a terrifying person. After a moment of silence, Huai Chaoshi said coldly, His Majesty asked the military and the Royal Intelligence Bureau to ensure the safety of that hero. Even if they have to give up on this mission, they will do it. Prince Bo Wu frowned. The military had been preparing this revenge plan for more than a year. No one wanted to see them give up on it. However, he also understood His Majesty's feelings. After Prince Doring was exposed, the Federation's Bureau of Proclamation had destroyed all the seeds that Fan Xian planted. That hero hiding in the Federal Military's Intelligence Department might be the last one. His Majesty is talking about the backup plan. The plan will be executed as usual. Please tell Prince Keaton to prepare his fleet. Huai Chaoshi narrowed her eyes and said, the time to make the Federation bleed is coming. Half an hour later, the ordinary-looking young officer of the Imperium boarded an ordinary-looking spaceship in the secret base of the military headquarters. His short hair was messy due to the strong wind on the tarmac and was stuffed into his military cap. Just like how his ordinary-looking appearance hid his noble identity, this ordinary-looking spaceship was, in fact, the latest super-speed spaceship specially made by the Empire's royal family. This spaceship would fly at the fastest speed to the edge of the star system that was filled with the turbulence of the warp hole. When he arrived, he would become the most ordinary soldier and follow the Empire's revenge fleet that they had been preparing for a long time to carry out a bloody mission that was originally a bit whimsical but was now very clear and real. Huai Chaoshi took off her epaulets and all the small items that could reveal her identity. She picked up a cup of fragrant coffee and sat by the porthole. She looked at the silent and eternal stars outside the window and narrowed her eyes. He had seen the information about the star system on the Federation's side before, but it was still unfamiliar to him, so he was curious and looked forward to it. This feeling was just like when he saw the national girl on the screen in the palace. At this moment, the young officer suddenly remembered the young Federation officer behind Jian Shui, who didn't leave a deep impression on him. It was said that this person and Li Pifu's grandson were known as the strongest mecha warriors of the Federation's younger generation. Huai Caoshi's eyes narrowed again. She thought with some regret that she probably wouldn't be able to encounter this person in this mission. Not being able to kill a war hero of the Federation was truly a pity. The Nebula Award ceremony had just ended when Su Lu and Jian Shui silently disappeared from everyone's sight. Many people noticed this and tried to find their figures, but on such an exciting night, everyone's attention was immediately diverted to the several grand celebratory banquets that were going to be held later. With the help of the Federal Central Computer, Sulu had a good understanding of the architectural layout of the George Carlin Foundation's central building, as well as the security measures tonight. Just like hiding a cat in his own attic, he led Jian Shui and walked easily and freely in the darkness, avoiding everyone's gaze. They passed through layer after layer of security and arrived at an abandoned door in the shadows at the side of the building. Jian Shui's hand was held by him the whole time, and she kept looking at his back curiously. This guy's hands were full of calluses, and his back was very firm. His posture when he was sneaking away with her was calm and confident, as if the dark stairs and old-fashioned door locks before them didn't exist. The palms of the two hands holding each other were slightly damp. Facing her now, Sulu naturally didn't feel the panic and helplessness of facing his idol, but holding her hand, was still nervous. Along the way, the two of them didn't speak. It wasn't that the young man and woman were letting the ambiguity fester in the dark. On the contrary, it was a kind of closeness that only family members could have, which made the two of them more and more accustomed to each other's existence. At least, that was the case for Jian Shuier. Apart from her family in Philadelphia, this was the first time she had such trust, closeness, and even a natural sense of familiarity. This was the same feeling she had when she was in the hospital. The abandoned iron doors still had an extremely complicated electronic lock, but under Su Li's fingers and the small tools he carried with him, the electronic lock only resisted for less than 10 seconds before it clicked and unbuckled. It had no choice but to give way. A black car was parked outside the door. The door opened automatically, and Su Lu and Jian Shui got in. Suddenly, a voice sounded from the dark back seat. The voice was unusually calm, but because of this calmness, it revealed a kind of temperament and pride that could only be cultivated over thousands of years. Even if it was Mr. Pabre, I wouldn't have waited for so long. Sulu looked at the slightly thin face of his friend in the rear-view holographic screen and said with a smile, "This is normal. In my opinion, you're more important than Mr. President. Of course, the prerequisite is that you don't speak in such an annoying tone." Tai Ziyuan leaned against the back of the seat and closed his eyes to rest. The corners of his lips curled up slightly as he said slowly, "I've already given up the front passenger seat." "What are you still not satisfied with?" Jian Shui didn't say anything. She just watched the two young men bicker with great interest. In the uppermost circle of the Federation, there had always been rumors about the friendship between the young master of the Tai family and Lieutenant Colonel Su Lu. Many people didn't believe this to be true, including Jian Shui. Although she wasn't the daughter of an aristocratic family, she was the daughter of the god of war. She knew very well how difficult it was for someone like Tai Ziyuan to gain the friendship of ordinary people. However, when she saw it with her own eyes today, she realized that the friendship between these two men was actually deeper than many people thought. This kind of friendship must be extremely difficult to maintain. Jian Shui narrowed her eyes slightly and couldn't help but admire the two of them. The Li family's spaceship encountered a space storm, so its speed will be a bit slower. We don't have to wait for him. Su Li's hands were firmly on the steering wheel as he drove the black car towards the train station. "It's your honor to meet this seventh young master." Tai Ziyuan opened his eyes and looked at the rumored couple in front of him with the help of the streetlights outside the car window. After a slight smile, he realized that it was only at this moment that he could completely relax. Sulu understood what he wanted to say, so he smiled and nodded as a reply. However, he had a strange feeling in his heart. He never understood the relationship between the 7 great families, but he knew very well that Tai Ziyuan's existence was completely different from the other descendants of the families. Whether it was the seemingly prominent successors of the other families, or even Tai Ziyuan himself, they all tacitly agreed that he was different and superior. The black car drove steadily in the spring breeze. At about the same time, Bai Yulan quietly left the Army General Hospital with a card with the nurse's phone number written on it. She got into a taxi and softly said to the driver, "Old train station." 10 minutes later, at the Nebula Awards ceremony celebration banquet, the members of Team 7 had just entered the banquet hall. They were cautious and didn't pick up the dishes, but they tried to straighten their backs and strike up a conversation with the beautiful female celebrities. At this time, they felt a slight numbness in their waists. The expressions of the members slightly changed. They raised their wrists at the same time and looked at the field command system communication displayed on their military watches. Almost at the same time, they put down the wine glasses in their hands and resolutely retreated under the burning gazes of the female celebrities. They quickly left the banquet hall and quickly drove towards the airport. This was an old-style sightseeing train line. It used antique railway cars, but the interior decoration was unusually luxurious. The railway company focused on the nostalgic style of the dynasty, hoping to offset the disadvantage of speed with comfort. However, in today's federation, where time and money were completely equal, there weren't many people willing to take this kind of train. Su Lu, Tai Ziyuan, and Jian Shuier. These three people had completely different personalities and backgrounds, but were the most outstanding young people in certain fields in the Federation. At this time, they were like ordinary passengers, sitting in the slightly undulating and swaying carriage. The electric circuit outside the window swept back, and under the night lights, a few birds could be faintly seen resting on the electric wires as if they were sleeping. Tai Ziyuan looked out of the window with a calm expression. He didn't hide the interest and relaxation in his eyes. Ordinary means of transportation were already an extravagant hope for him, not to mention this old-style train. He didn't turn around and said, "I originally thought that you would choose to eat in Linyuan. I heard from Shinli that you seem to like the food there." "I prefer the scenery in Linyuan," Su Lu replied. Linyuan was good, but unfortunately, there were too many people who could recognize their identity. The three of them traveling together was too conspicuous, so he chose another place. Tai Ziyuan turned around and frowned. "The Yishui Bay you chose is the latest place that Lin Banshan is taking care of. I heard that it's very lively these days. You know, I don't like lively places. I asked Secretary Jiao to help me book it. It should be very quiet." Su Lu picked up the teacup and took a sip, his eyes slightly narrowed. He knew that Bai Magnolia had arrived. The theme of this trip to Yishui Bay was to meet up with old friends. He also wanted to do something by the way. The two experts from Bermuda were dead, but there was still some aftermath to clean up. This was something that he had thought about when he was at the front line in the West Woods. In fact, even if he didn't do it, those people who were angry because of his assassination would do it. Chapter 545. The next day, the train arrived in South Kazhou. When Su Lu and the other two walked out of the station, the black car without a logo had been quietly waiting for a long time. Back then, he would have shuddered at such a supernatural scene. However, after living in the capital ring for many years, he was mostly surrounded by people like Tai Ziyuan and Li Xiaotong. Naturally, he knew that many things that were incomprehensible to ordinary citizens were just a matter of a glance to those at the top of society. South Kazhou had the largest wetland reserve in S1. At the end of the long grass was the tranquil sea, famous for its beautiful scenery. The place they were going to today was a quiet manor on the shore of the tranquil sea, in the midst of dense forests and meadows. The black car drove through the entrance of the manor without a sign. They had gone through the cumbersome authorization code verification in advance, so they were not questioned. The manor covered a large area. The west side was the tranquil sea, and the north side was facing a slowly rising hillside. There were forests in the mountains and sand by the sea. Between the green forests and white sand, there was the smell of water blowing from the direction of the wetland. There were also countless white birds flying in between. The road was so long that it seemed to have no end. Walking along the side of the shallow water, after going around a certain mountain pass, the line of sight suddenly opened up. A vast and calm blue ocean and a lonely hillside in the middle of the vast expanse of heaven and earth suddenly appeared before their eyes, causing them to be unable to help but feel refreshed and refreshed. Tai Ziyuan leaned lazily on the back seat. This posture was completely inconsistent with the strict family education he had received since childhood. Even his voice became a little relaxed. Something else. Lin Banshan's name has always been a little stylish. He hid the words mountains and rivers behind it, so that people who come in can fill in the 4 words in front of them. Something else, mountains and rivers, was the name of the manor. Lin Banshan, a member of the 7 great families of noble birth, had burst out laughing in the past. It was unknown how many earth-shattering events he had caused in the Federation and Bermuda. However, his interest in his leisure time had always remained in the courtyard. Lin Garden was like that, and so was this manor. Even if it was just a hobby in his spare time, it was a structure that the elders of the Lin family deliberately imitated and Wood Valley Manor could not compare. It's rare for the 7 great clans to produce such a talented person like him, but in the end, he only puts his mind on these trivial matters. Tai Ziyuan commented on the owner of this place, shaking his head and sighing. The small matter he was talking about was not only referring to the garden rest house, but also the vast underground industry under Lin Banshan. In his opinion, compared to the structure of the Federation or the universe, these things could only ever be small paths that led astray. They would never be able to step onto the real stage, so he didn't really agree. Or rather, he felt that it was a pity that Lin Banshan had wasted his energy on this. Other manors were located in a remote area. As Lin Banshan's property, not many people in the entire Federation could afford to spend here, so it had always been quiet and peaceful. But today, for some reason, faint laughter and music could be heard from the beach buildings on the left side of the long forest road. Su Le narrowed his eyes and glanced in that direction. He didn't answer Tai Ziyuan's sigh and continued to drive steadily. The car followed the flat road, passing by the sea and going straight into the meadow, hillside, and forest. There were no more noises, only the early chirping of cicadas and the late birds, and the low and soft grinding sound of the tires. At the top of the hillside was a manicured but still natural lawn, and further ahead was the most beautiful natural reef bay in the calm sea. Under the wide floor-to-ceiling glass, the 3 of them quietly ate delicious food, occasionally chatting, and occasionally looking out of the window, letting the scenery of the bay enter their eyes. The old man didn't make a statement, but it doesn't mean that he doesn't support Mr. President's plan to attack the empire. I think he probably feels that now is not the time for him to show up. Jian Shui, looked at the 3 stalks of golden chrysanthemums spinning in the glass of water and said with a smile, in fact, the official residence and the Ministry of National Defense arranged last night's performance, which has already helped a lot in this matter. You showed up, and I also sang, so Mr. President should be satisfied. The light fragrance of white maple wood filled the small villa surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows. There were only the 3 of them here, and all the servants had already left, so they didn't need to be too careful when talking. In front of the young master of the Tai family, although Jian Shui, didn't hide her relationship with the Philadelphia family, she also didn't call the great military god of the Federation, old man. The people at the top of the Federation, such as the core of the 7 great families, such as the leaders of the parliament and the military, were very clear about the close relationship between the national girl Jian Shui, and the Lees of Philadelphia, but most of them couldn't figure out what this relationship was. Tai Ziyuan was different. The relationship between the back of the mountain and the Philadelphia family started a few decades ago, and the relationship was complicated and tangled. The madam knew about the existence of Jian Shui, for a long time, so he naturally knew about it as well. But at this time, seeing that this beautiful superstar didn't want to say it, he naturally didn't want to say it. President Pabre pushed you and your subordinates to the front of the stage. I believe that even if you have a slow political sense, you will understand this method. He gently wiped the corner of his mouth, drank some water, and calmly said, if there is an anti-war trend in the Federation in the future, no matter which class started the trend, your opinion will become very important. When Su Luo was ordering, he very tastelessly ordered a large plate of his own creative dish Caspian caviar with rice and a large pot of Gata coffee. At this time, he was eating noisily when he suddenly heard his two friends suddenly bring the topic to such a high level. He couldn't help but choke. After coughing, he puffed out his cheeks and said, my opinion is very important. Because you and Group 7 are now idol-level figures in the hearts of the people. Tai Ziyuan said with slight mockery, although you are idols, this is already a fact. The most important thing is that in the eyes of many people, your opinion to a certain extent represents the opinion of the old man of the Philadelphia family. You have to know that to this day, even I don't know the true relationship between you and the old man, let alone other people. Let's stop this topic. Su Lu poured a cup of coffee and said, I said before that this is a secret, I can't tell you. Jian Shui'er heard these words and faintly smiled. She was incomparably beautiful. Tianhai Qingguang, both inside and outside the floor-to-ceiling window, instantly seemed to be attracted to her body. Tai Ziyuan's eyes flashed with a sliver of praise. He immediately looked at Su Lu and calmly asked, why do you want to help Mr. President? Because he's your family's business partner? Su Lu shrugged and said, not everything needs a reason of benefit. This matter has nothing to do with anyone. I'm just doing things according to my opinion. In my opinion, if the Federation wants to obtain true peace, it must attack the Empire's homeland and beat the other side until they don't dare to start a war again. He looked at the two people around the table and very seriously said, this understanding is something I learned from Commander Zhong. Tai Ziyuan was silent for a moment. He did not continue this boring question. He looked at the high-quality almond pastry on his silver fork and frowned slightly. I still think the scallion pastry you used to buy is better. Jian Shui'er softly added from the side, I've snuck out with Sister Tong to eat at the night market a few times. Those scallion pastry really is delicious, just that it's a little too strong. At that time, in Yue University's H1 Mecha combat room, Su Lu would often use scallion pastry and plain porridge to exchange for Tai Ziyuan's Gata coffee and Caspian caviar many nights. These interesting past events were admittedly the beginning of the two's friendship, but they also illustrated the difference in their growth experiences. Now, hearing Tai Ziyuan and Jian Shui'er praise him so seriously, he couldn't help but frown as he glanced at the black caviar in front of him. He didn't pretentiously sympathize with these two pampered children for not having the happy lives of ordinary people. He only lamented that deep down, he was still a poor boy. How's Yuzi doing right now? When exactly are you two getting married? Tai Ziyuan suddenly raised an eyebrow and asked curiously. Hearing this, Jian Shui'er's eyes lit up slightly. She looked quietly at Su Lu. She knew that this crown prince was trying to tease her and Su Lu, but for some reason, she really wanted to hear the answer from Su Li's mouth. Su Lu raised his head and stared at Tai Ziyuan. She's not your crown princess candidate right now. Naturally, it has something to do with someone else. As for other things, I can't be bothered to explain them to you. The affairs of the human world were very strange. When they had first met in Linhai, Red Coat Zhou was definitely an existence that made one angry and disgraceful. However, as the years passed, their relationship had long since changed. Now, thinking of Tai Ziyuan's attitude back then, how she had stopped his black car on the highway and wept to her heart's content, he actually felt that Zhou wasn't worth it. He felt that it was unfair for her, and he felt resentment towards Tai Ziyuan. She was my only normal friend when I was young. Tai Ziyuan spread out his hands and said, it seems that this world is becoming more and more complicated. Just pretend I didn't ask. After a night of train, a sea breeze, a simple meal, and a chat, the rare gathering of friends had come to an end. Tai Ziyuan looked at Su Lu and said calmly, "The attitude you want to express to those old guys doesn't need me to be a witness. I won't watch that play later. There are still some things I need to take care of at home. I'll leave after sitting for a while." "You've appeared with me." "That's already a witness," Su Lu replied with a smile, not saying the words, "Thank you." Tai Ziyuan shrugged his shoulders in a very casual manner. He put the wet towel on the table and reminded him, "Don't kill him." Tai Ziyuan naturally knew very well about the assassination attempt on Commander Zhong and Su Lu in Sunset State in West Woods. However, after the assassination attempt in Linhai State Stadium, this young prince had always maintained a kind of blind trust in Su Lu. He didn't believe that those stupid guys could hurt Su Lu. Since that was the case, why should he care? Jian Shui didn't understand what they were talking about. She shrugged her shoulders helplessly like the men, and used the edge of her palm to adjust the brim of her hat. She smiled sweetly and said, "I have to leave first. The school has a mock exam in New Moon Base tomorrow." Chapter 546. The sunlight passed through the white curtain and shone into the bed. Lin Dohai frowned and cursed in disgust. He then got up and washed up. He casually put on a set of silk and linen pajamas and walked out of the room. Listening to the laughter and music coming from the seaside, the corner of his lips slightly raised, revealing a happy smile. Last autumn, he, Zhong Ziqi, and Nan Ming Xiu had arranged for that assassination in Sunset Province. Under the silent gazes of the important figures, the successors of the two great families and the son of the anti-government leader of Azure Dragon Mountain used the power of their families. In the end, they still couldn't kill that person. After that, Nan Mingxiu was kidnapped back to Green Dragon Mountain, Zhong Ziqi was banished back to Jingwei, and he was directly escorted back to the S3 family manor by the elders of the family from the Westland Horse Field until a month ago. Although he was no longer under house arrest, there were still many places he couldn't go. The attitude of the Lin family was still cautious and even a little nervous, completely unlike the indifferent attitude of the 1,000-year-old family. From this point, it could be seen that they were afraid of Su Lu and the old man behind him. This kind of day was very distressing. Lin Dohai took a cup of specially brewed wine and sat on the deck chair in the sea breeze. There was a trace of resentment in his heart. The elders silently watched them do this, but in the end, they, the young people, had to bear the consequences of failure. His fingers slid across the smooth crystal cup. He thought of the woman's creamy skin last night and smiled with satisfaction. However, this smile immediately disappeared because he thought of his fiancée who had broken off the engagement. Although the marriage between the 7 families was not as rigid as within the empire, it represented the respect between each other and had a very strong sense of ceremony. However, Lin Banshan's words made the marriage between the Nan family and the Lin family disappear. The elders of the family were not willing to provoke that lousy disciple, so they could only transfer the pressure and reprimand to him. Lin Dohai's fingers holding the cup slightly tightened, and a faint resentment appeared between his eyebrows. He hated his elder brother, but he hated Su Lu even more for making Nan Xiangmei jump out of her gentle nature and dared to say no. "You don't seem to be in a good mood." A young woman of about 30 years of age leisurely walked over and sat beside him with a smile. The traces of time had indeed left some traces on her cheeks, but those traces did not reveal the vicissitudes of life. Instead, they were filled with a mature charm, causing the eyes and hearts of men who saw her to be unable to help but be greatly moved. Lin Dohai nodded politely. He didn't answer her question, nor did he stare at her like he was used to playing the role of a young master. He knew very well that this woman named Li Feirong was not someone he could touch. In the past few days in the manor, this woman had carefully taken care of his life. For example, last night, she was a shy young flower. Lin Dohai stared blankly at the sea. There were beautiful sceneries, delicious food, and beautiful women in the manor. As long as he wanted something, he could find it. However, after staying there for several days, he felt that his body was about to become rusty from the sea breeze. He always wanted to go out for a walk. Even those friends who had just returned and gathered a few times couldn't make his mood happy. "Sister Rongrong, what are those guys playing at?" he asked. The young woman smiled sweetly and said, "What else could it be? Just those things that men like." A strange expression flashed across Lin Dohai's face. His friends in the buildings over there had been drinking all night. Naturally, they would be more presumptuous. However, the young people who could enter this manor had their own backgrounds and knew the rules of the owner. They wouldn't dare to mess around, right? He was still depressed. He frowned and turned his wine glass. As long as Su Luo was popular in the Federation, he would be depressed. However, it seemed that it would be more and more difficult to kill this guy. "I really want to play gliding." Lin Dohai stared at the empty sea and imagined his favorite scene of flying over Bitao at low altitude. He said angrily, "He's in Bermuda now. How would he know what we're doing?" Li Feirong spread her hands and said nothing, indicating that she was sorry that she couldn't help. Lin Dohai didn't lose his temper. He just looked at Kong Hai silently. There were no electric devices on the shoreline of the manor because his brother didn't like the manor to be too noisy. He respected the woman beside him because she was his brother's woman. The reason why this woman respected and treated him so well was because she had always wanted to be his brother's woman for more than a decade. Lin Dohai took a sip of the wine and thought to himself in a slightly mocking manner. There were many truths in the world that needed to be explained by these awkward words. Just like taking a mountain road, you always had to take a lot of detours before you could drive to the top of the mountain. Su Lu never took a detour. On Tiger Mountain Road, he slashed people with his sword, and in the research lab, he only swung his hand in a straight line. From Donglin to the Capital Ring, out of Flowing Wind Slope, and into the Foundation Building, he was used to walking in a straight line. This couldn't be said to be a heroic spirit, but there was a certain biting sense of stubbornness. After coming down from the top of the mountain, he drove the black car and drove along the road to the buildings by the sea. The complex area of the manor was divided by security. The black car was completely ignored, but with the help of the old man, no automatic alarm sounded. There was a door on the outside of the building. Su Lu pushed the door open and entered without a sound. The security guard by the door was slightly shocked. He went forward to ask but didn't get any answer. He tried to stop him, but he was shocked by the young man's expression. In just a moment, the young man had walked far away. Looking at the back that made him feel a little scared, the security guard didn't hesitate to press the alarm button. However, there was still no alarm. None of the armed security guards who were vigilant 24 hours a day came out. Facing the sea breeze, the spring forest, and the buildings and the spacious area hidden in the forest, no security guards appeared. It was quiet all around, only the sound of the sea breeze tangling with the trees. At this moment, the heavily guarded door was completely open to Su Lu. The scene felt a little strange. Su Lu, who was walking in a straight line towards a certain place by the sea, suddenly felt a low-frequency buzzer hidden in his ear. He stood under a big tree for a moment and connected to the phone signal that had been filtered by 7 groups of filters. He has already left. Let's meet again next time. Li Xiaodong's cold and regretful voice came from the other end of the phone. It's a pity that it's so difficult to meet the Crown Prince. Forget it. I'm at the periphery of the manor. The car will come in soon. Let's have a good drink. I have something to do first. Holding the phone, Su Lu looked at the faintly visible buildings in front of him and listened to the faint drumbeat of music. He said, I think, it's not convenient for you to follow me. You can wait in the restaurant for a while. After saying this, he hung up the phone. In the car outside the manor, Li Xiaotong stared at the phone in a daze. He was silent. Then he quickly dialed the numbers of several people in the family and confirmed some of the things he was worried about. His fair face became extremely shocked. He said to the driver in a cold voice, "Go to the seaside villa as soon as possible." While seventh young Master Li was trying to stop something from happening, Sulu had already walked alone into the seaside garden surrounded by white and yellow crow-style buildings. The garden occupied a large area. White stones and white sand were next to the clear water. The sun was shining brightly and the scenery was very beautiful. The background music that reverberated around was controlled by an electronic central control, ensuring that the best sound quality could be heard in every villa. It played from the entrance to the seaside. It was the designer's proudest masterpiece. However, as Sulu walked into the garden, the background music seemed to be disturbed by his footsteps and fell silent. Wherever he walked, the music was silent. Only the sound of footsteps became clearer and clearer. There were some puzzled voices in the various villas. A few young men in luxurious clothes rubbed their tired faces after sex and walked to the window and the balcony to look into the garden. Then they saw a man in military uniform walking toward a deck chair by the seaside. The music stopped with his footsteps. This scene was very shocking. Gu Shifeng, stop the music. Sulu, who was in the middle of the garden, said to the system, "Today is not a movie shoot, and you are not by Ziming. I don't need this kind of entrance ceremony." Following these words, the music by the seaside stopped. Below the salty wind and the cheerful water birds, the people in the villas watched this scene in shock. Sulu walked to 10 meters in front of the deck chair and stopped. At some point, 4 bodyguards with guns appeared around the deck chair and stared at him vigilantly. Lin Dohai, who was sitting on the deck chair, looked at this person who suddenly appeared. He was so shocked that he could not speak. He wanted to sit up, but he found that his waist and legs were weak. His knuckles, which were holding the cup, were pale because of nervousness. Sulu did not look at the bodyguards with guns. His eyes fell on the deck chair and looked at the young man who tried to kill him. He narrowed his eyes and said, "I really admire you. Your family's elders know to avoid my revenge, but you still dare to come out and play." Lin Dohai did not speak. He slowly put the crystal cup on the short table beside him. It took him a lot of effort to prevent the specially brewed wine at the bottom of the cup from spilling out. "What do you want to do?" Looking at Sulu, who was not far in front of him, he felt an unprecedented sense of fear. He felt that his throat was very painful, and his voice was hoarse. The 4 bodyguards stared at him vigilantly and carefully reached for their holsters. They believed in their own strength and shouldn't be afraid of this unarmed man in front of them. However, the silence outside and the young master's expression proved to them that this person was dangerous. "Put away your guns." The nominal owner of the manor, Madame Li Feirong, walked over expressionlessly and said calmly, "Even the Mecca of the Empire can't do anything to Lieutenant Colonel Sulu, let alone a few guns." Chapter 547. The residence on the mountain was reserved by Secretary Jiao of the Ministry of National Defense. Based on the rules that had started with Lin Yuan, Li Feirong did not inquire about the details of the guest. Only when she saw the other person appear in front of her silently, firmly, and dangerously, did she know who the other person was. This woman, who was like water with a hidden charm, was able to guard a figure like Lin Banshan for more than 10 years and was qualified to take care of the sea garden for him. Other than proving her peerless appearance and the man's love for her, it was also a great affirmation of her ability. Looking at Sulu, she smiled slightly and said those words. The originally extremely tense atmosphere seemed to be about to develop in the direction of relaxation. However, unexpectedly, the young man in front of her did not respond at all to her words. He only looked at Lin Dohai on the recliner. The sea breeze blew gently. The corners of Li Feirong's eyes curled up beautifully, adding a trace of enchantment. However, her mood gradually became cold and slightly mocking. She was very clear about Su Li's background and origins. Naturally, she had to value him, but it could not be said to be reverence. It was probably because of the influence of that broken door. She had always believed that the heroes created by the government were much less dangerous than the true heroes because they were bound by many inner laws. Because of this, she felt somewhat unhappy and disdainful toward the attitude that Su Lu displayed at this time. Lin Dohai's friends walked out of the lock-style seaside residence. There were not many of them, but the slight mockery and displeasure on their faces seemed to be molded from the same mold. This guy was the Federation war hero. What a tacky title. These nobles had more or less heard about Su Li's deeds and knew about his vague background. They might even have been sternly warned by their elders. However, in their eyes, rumors were always rumors. This young officer in front of them who had seized all the glory of the Federation suddenly broke into their world today and provoked them with such a cold and valiant attitude. Due to some psychological reasons, they especially had to show their confidence and disdain. But there was one person in the crowd who stood out from the rest. Shi Peng, whose eyes were sunken, looked at Su Lu who was standing alone by the sea and shouted in surprise, "Boss." As the favorite nephew of the vice-chairman of the Federation, he naturally had the qualifications to be a guest of the young master of the Lin family. After a few nights of partying and exhaustion, he suddenly saw his former superior appear in front of him, which made him extremely shocked. He subconsciously called out as per usual, but after shouting, he was somewhat unaccustomed to the fact that he had already left Group 7. Su Li's appearance today was obviously aimed at Lin Dohai. It was definitely related to the assassination in the Westwood Sunset Province. Shi Peng's expression suddenly became somewhat embarrassed and uneasy. She silently looked at Su Lu for a while and then retreated behind her friends. If this was a camp between one person and a group of people, he didn't want to stand on the opposite side of the boss, but he also didn't have a way to deal with his companions. Su Lu, I've tolerated you for many years. Wearing a nightgown, Lin Dohai finally suppressed the fear in his heart and stood up. His cheeks were slightly pale, and he said in a low voice, "If you have the ability, you can try to kill me today." Among the nobles present, there were cousins of the South Minister's family, relatives of the Yi family, and officers who had just returned from the front lines. Behind them were armed bodyguards. Uncle Kong and the family's special guards should be on their way, but Su Lu in front of them was only one person and didn't seem to have any weapons. More importantly, this seaside manor was called Other Mountains and Rivers, and it belonged to a man called Lin Banshan. No matter what their relationship was, no one could deny that he was Lin Banshan's younger brother. It was because of these reasons that Lin Dohai finally recovered some of the bearing of a successor of a 1,000-year-old family. Hearing these words, Su Li's thick eyebrows rose. These people were born high and mighty. It seemed that all of their logic was chaotic. You tried to kill me, but the result was that you had tolerated me for many years? The moment his eyebrows rose, Li Feirong felt a strange feeling for no reason. She suppressed the trace of anger in her heart and looked at Su Lu with a smile. "Lieutenant Colonel Su Lu, perhaps there was some misunderstanding between you and Dohai. I think we should find a convenient place to talk." In her view, no matter how valiant and cold Su Li's performance was today, or even if he brought the legendary Group 7 to control the security of Other Mountains and Mountains, he couldn't really kill Lin Dohai in front of so many people. After showing his attitude, there was always a need for negotiations, and negotiations naturally needed a quieter place. However, she was wrong about the most important thing. Even if Su Lu wanted to negotiate with someone, these nobles by the sea, Lin Dohai and her, were not qualified to negotiate with him. "You can decide between me and him." Su Lu looked at the charming young woman and asked, "If you can't, please don't interrupt." A trace of shame and anger flashed between Li Feirong's eyebrows. In the final analysis, her status came from Lin Banshan's favor. Others respected and feared her because of this. However, if someone was not afraid of Lin Banshan's favor, the situation would naturally become like this. The trace of shame and anger was restrained, but it was too late to turn into a graceful bearing and calm demeanor. The emotion froze on her face for a moment because she heard the news from the manor's transportation department in her earpiece. Just now, the Black Hawk Company's helicopter combat team landed next to the mountain residence and picked up the young guest inside. Then, a military helicopter painted with the logo of the 1st Military Region's Secret Service Brigade landed and picked up the other female guest. Black Hawk Company. Was the young man who had dinner with Sulu in the mountain residence the rumored crown prince? Who was the female guest? She dared to use a military helicopter as a means of transportation. Thinking of these questions, Li Feirong looked at Sulu in front of her and realized that she could not control the situation brought by this young officer at all. However, she still smiled and stood in front of Sulu because she had to ensure Lin Dohai's safety. On the one hand, she was very concerned about the feelings of the elders of the Lin family. More importantly, if something happened to Lin Dohai, she did not know how to explain it to Lin Banshan. Just as Li Feirong's brain was quickly turning, thinking about how to solve the current situation, but she was angry because she could not see what Su Lu wanted. Someone in the crowd by the sea could no longer stand Su Li's silent oppression and made a move. A son of an aristocratic family who had just been promoted to major because of killing enemies on the front line put his hand on the holster and said to Su Lu in a low voice, "Lieutenant Colonel Su Lu." Suddenly, a gunshot rang out in the quiet seaside manner, making it seem especially arrogant. The man's words stopped abruptly before he finished. His right hand in the holster was accurately hit by a high-speed bullet from afar. With a crack, his wrist bone broke. The young major held his wrist and painfully rolled to the ground. He screamed miserably and beads of sweat rolled down his face like soybeans. "This is not your business." Su Lu looked around at the people around him, whose expressions had changed drastically. He stretched out his finger and said, "Don't do anything that might arouse suspicion, because I can't guarantee what kind of bullet the next time will be." The moment the crisp and distant sound of a sniper rifle rang out, the 4 bodyguards of the Lin family quickly surrounded Lin Daohai. Then, they quickly used their eyes to search for the position of the sniper. At the same time, they were shocked by the silence of their colleagues on the periphery. Nervousness shrouded their hearts, and coupled with their professional judgment, they really did not reach for their holsters again. Li Feirong finally could not control her expression. She stared at Su Lu and said in a cold voice, "Do you know whose manor this is? Do you know whose younger brother he is? How dare you shoot in this place? If you've studied me." Su Lu looked into the woman's eyes and said, "Then you should know that I never choose a place when I shoot." Li Feirong's pupils shrank. Thinking of the rumors of the man in front of her assassinating Senator Macklin, she could not help but take a deep breath. She suppressed the shock and anger in her heart, as well as the unimaginable sense of absurdity. She asked coldly, "What do you want to do?" Li Feirong took a deep breath and suppressed the shock and anger in her heart. She said coldly, "What do you want to do? The purpose of my visit today is very simple." Su Lu looked at the pale-faced Lin Daohai and said, "A debt must be repaid with money, and a life for a life. It is only right." Hearing this, Lin Dohai suddenly roared angrily, "You're not dead." Su Lu was silent for a moment, then explained with a smile, "You tried to kill me, but you didn't. That's because my subordinates are capable. So I'm just trying to kill you today. As for whether or not I can kill you, it depends on the abilities of you and your subordinates." Very simple words explained a very cold truth. Su Lu and the team that had not shown up had already taken control of the manor. If he really wanted to kill someone, who could stop him? Lin Dohai's thin lips began to tremble uncontrollably. Li Feirong, however, understood something at this moment. She said with a slightly tense voice, "I don't think a promising war hero of the Federation is willing to become a murderer. You should be very clear about his identity. If you really kill him, no matter how many big shots want to protect you, you won't be able to find any shelter in the Federation." She said in a more serious tone, and don't forget, Do-hai is his younger brother. Even if you escape to Bermuda, you won't have any hope. Then the beautiful woman laughed. The most important thing is that Do-hai is still alive. Your subordinates didn't shoot him, which means that you don't want to kill him today, or rather, you don't dare to kill him. You're wrong. Sulu looked at her and replied seriously, like I said just now, when I decide to kill someone, I never choose a place. Of course, I'm also prepared to flee or die. You people will never let others find legal evidence. Sometimes, I'm forced to do things in secret. I know the rules of this society. No one would act recklessly like this. It's just that the path I'm used to walking has always been different from others. It's a bit awkward. This has nothing to do with courage or morality. It's purely a personal grudge. If the matter of the Sunset State is not resolved, my heart will not be satisfied. I won't be able to live well. But you're right. I'm really waiting for a call, although I don't know who will make this call. But if this call doesn't come, I'll prove it. Sulu looked at the woman again. He looked at the pale-faced Lin Do-hai and said seriously, I'm here today to prove to you and your parents that no matter where you hide, I'll find you and kill you very easily. And I dare to kill you. In the damp sea breeze, he narrowed his eyes. His slightly trembling single eyelids appeared particularly refreshing. Chapter 548. A group of people gathered by the quiet seaside. Outside the forest, there was a sniper rifle and troops hidden in the shadows. The atmosphere was tense and oppressive. The people standing opposite of Sulu were as stiff as statues, not daring to move too much. Sulu admitted that he was waiting for a certain phone call, which slightly eased the sense of urgency. However, the long silence that followed was also an extremely harsh test for the hearts of the people. Schiller had a two-act tragicomedy called Waiting for the Man with the Surname Gu. The characters in the play never saw that person appear. Only absurd delirium filled the play, endless and torturous. Just like at this moment, everyone was waiting for Su Li's phone to ring, but it didn't ring. At this time, a silver luxury car came at high speed from the mountain road. The hard rubber tires made a violent grinding sound on the ground. The security equipment of the manor had been completely disabled, and there was no equipment to respond to the arrival of this car. Before the silver car came to a stop, Li Xiaotong jumped out of the car and blocked in front of Su Lu. He forcefully tore open the bow tie on his neck and didn't have time to wipe the sweat from his well-trimmed temples. He looked at Su Li's face and said, "Take a deep breath and think again." As an early investor and close friend of Su Lu, the seventh young master, who was a calculative person, knew very well how stubborn this guy was. When he saw that pair of small eyes slightly narrowed, he knew that Su Lu really had the intention to kill today. Li Xiaotong felt a chill in his heart and blocked in front of Su Lu. He didn't expect that he could change the other party's decision. He had just told what had happened in the manor to his father. He only hoped that those old guys could quickly make a decision, although the decision was a bit too difficult for the dignity of the seven great families. Su Lu shook hands with him and replied, "The one you need to think about now is not me." Although he said this, he really did follow Li Xiaotong's advice and took a few deep breaths. The slightly salty sea breeze poured into his lungs, making him feel very comfortable and clear. Once again, he confirmed that his request was not excessive. Li Xiaotong was slightly relieved. He lifted the cotton bow tie and quickly wiped the sweat from his temples. He stood beside him and began to wait with him for the phone that might never ring. The phone rang. Su Lu waited for the phone to ring twice before he picked up the call. No one spoke on the other end of the line. It was as quiet as the silent night. Only a very light and long breathing sound could be heard. Judging from the breathing sound, the person on the other end should be an old man. "Leave this manor, and I will pretend that nothing happened." After a long silence, an old and cold voice suddenly sounded from the other end of the phone. The other party's tone was as mysterious and proud as the Federation's ordinary citizens imagined, with an innate sense of oppression and authority. It was as if the ordinary people in this universe were born to obey or revere him. This was not what Sulu wanted to hear, so he raised his thick eyebrows slightly and unsheathed them like two flying knives. He remained stubbornly silent and did not say a word. He just put his left hand behind his back and slowly clenched his fist. The answer to the arrogant and domineering old man on the other end of the phone was a crisp gunshot. The sniper rifle on the other end of the mountain opened fire again. The real bullet cut through the air with a whistling sound and hit the sand in front of Lin Dohai's feet. With a whoosh, it shot into the ground who knew how many meters deep. There was a burst of suppressed cries of alarm and frightened retreating footsteps from the seaside. Although it only splashed up a cloud of sand, everyone could see the power of this bullet clearly. If the sniper's hand had trembled slightly, Lin Dohai's feet would have turned into a rain of blood. This young master of the Lin family, who was regarded as the most useless of the 7 great families' second generation, appeared to be much stronger than the people on the seaside. With a pale face, it was as if he did not hear the gunshot or feel the violent tremor from the soles of his feet. He insisted on not retreating a single step, clenching his teeth and staring at Sulu, who was talking on the phone in front of him. It was because he guessed who was on the phone. In this situation, which had not happened for many years, the dignity of the 7 great families could not be shaved anymore. Sulu still did not speak. After the head of the Lin family on the other end of the phone heard the gunshot, he also did not speak. That person, who was extremely mysterious and lofty in the eyes of ordinary people, knew very well what the young lieutenant colonel on the other end of the phone was waiting for him to say. For ordinary people, those words were very common, but for the head of the 7 great families, it was a condition that was difficult to accept. In the long history since the end of the Tai dynasty and the reconstruction of the political system of human society, these families, who hid behind the scenes of history and constantly influenced the direction of history for thousands of years, may have made substantial concessions, or may have had to endure for some time, but there were very few people who could force these family heads to bow their heads, because they represented the bottom line of the family's dignity. In addition to Mo Chao's back mountain, there had been a few very powerful chairmen and presidents who had done this. However, many of these great figures had paid a heavy price for it. They were either disgraced during their term of office, or assassinated in a cloud of mystery. Some of them were as powerful as they were in the beginning until death, but they could not prevent their descendants from suffering the devastating revenge of the 7 great families in the 100 years after their death. Today, Sulu brought dozens of people with him, and he wanted to do something that many people before him could not do. For the head of the Lin family and those great figures who had just received the news, what an absurd and arrogant attempt this was. After a long silence, on the oppressive and tense beach, there was a person lying across the blue sea and white clouds. The voice on the other end of the phone was very slow, self-restrained and indifferent. "My son is useless, you can kill him." This was still not the answer that Sulu wanted, or even the answer that he had not thought of. The moment he heard this, his pair of thick eyebrows that were about to fly up suddenly fell down. Looking at the deathly pale Lin Dohai from the corner of his eyes, he faintly understood why the 7 great families could fight against the Federation government for thousands of years without falling. In the logic of these families, nothing was more important than the survival of the family. Once this kind of abnormal family lost the extreme dignity, pride, and overwhelming desire for power, they would gradually lose the instinctive basis for survival. In a sense, the continuation of this kind of dignity and pride was even more important than the continuation of the bloodline. But for some reason, perhaps because he wanted to realize the fantasy of an ordinary person challenging the 7 great families, Sulu still wanted to try, so he was still silent. Looking at Lin Dohai not far in front of him, the left hand behind his back slightly moved. The sniper rifle in the mountain forest suddenly opened fire. Bang 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 bang. The dense and dull sound of high-speed bullets fiercely sounded on the beach. In an instant, who knew how many terrifying bullets enveloped the area, shooting the rain of sand into the sky into smoke and dust. There was a burst of exclamations on the beach, and those rich and powerful people fled in all directions. At this moment, no one noticed that in the smoke and dust, Lin Dohai was continuously letting out terrified howls. The smoke and dust settled, and the gunshots stopped. Between the lines of sand, Lin Dohai's face was deathly pale, and his legs were constantly trembling. His eyes stared blankly ahead, and his pupils could not focus at all. There was a water stain on the front of his nightgown, and there was a stench. He was so weak that he was about to collapse. He did not know that he was still alive, and had entered into a miserable mental state where he did not know whether he was alive or not. Sulu put the phone to his ear and waited in silence. After the call was connected, the head of the Lin family said a few words in a condescending and indifferent manner. With just a few words, he was able to knead a person's heart into a crisp. His bearing and shrewdness were unfathomable. However, it could not knead Su Li's heart, which was as hard as a rock. He kept silent, simply and straightforwardly using gunshots to face the other's temperament. It was still that old saying, only the barrel of a gun could spray out light wind and light clouds. People who wore shoes were always easily afraid of people who were barefoot, and people who spoke of temperament were always unable to do anything to simple people who were crude and straightforward. Even if the 7 great families were omnipotent, at this moment, Lin Dohai was under the gun. As long as Su Lu took the initiative to give in, no one could solve this problem. Then, someone had to give in, or Lin Dohai had to die. This time, the silence on both sides of the phone was even longer. It was so long that the people, who had scattered in all directions, once again turned their gazes back. They looked around in bewilderment, searching in vain for that terrifying sniper rifle. It was so long that the gentle sea breeze blew across the sand, covering up the dense and mournful bullet holes on the field. It was so long that the shocked expression on Li Feirong's face turned to confusion, and finally to fear and confusion. When he woke up, he tried to bravely lift up the unconscious Lin Dohai. Su Lu heard Gu Shifen's report. There was a signal on the Lin family's line. The Lin family's line could not be traced at all. As for this sudden signal, it was even more impossible to monitor. The other party's technical level was no weaker than that of Group 7. Who would call the head of the Lin family at such a tense moment? Su Lu frowned in thought. Then, a man with thin shoulders like a mountain appeared in his mind. His brows slowly relaxed, and he became calmer. Sure enough, a moment later, he finally heard the head of the Lin family speak again. This matter is our fault. The head of the Lin family's voice was old and slightly tired. I represent the Lin family and formally apologize to you. Also, as the head of the Lin family, I promise you that this kind of problem will never happen again. In this world, no, in history, how many people had heard the heads of the 7 great families personally apologize and seen them lower their heads? The ordinary people of the Federation had never thought of going against these 1,000-year-old families. Not only was it because these families were mysterious and unapproachable, but it was also because they knew that doing so would be futile. Su Lu now had a powerful background and dozens of guns. He was no longer an ordinary person, but compared to the 7 great families, he was still insignificant and insignificant. However, today, he didn't even use any of his background. He just brought a group of brothers and barged in a straight line. This proved that as long as he tried hard, perhaps some things could really be done successfully. Hearing these words, Su Lu narrowed his eyes and grinned, revealing his white teeth. After a pause, he finally spoke for the first time. I heard you. Sorry to disturb you. Then he hung up the phone and waited for the next call that was about to come. Chapter 549. On planet S3 in the northwest star region, white snow floated in the cold air. The self-heating defrosting line in the mezzanine of the huge floor-to-ceiling glass curtain wall made a low buzzing sound. Water flowed down from the frost surface, looking like an abstract line painting. Lin Banshan faced the window with his hands behind his back. His thin and straight shoulders showed a sense of steepness. The gray coat that rarely changed was like the gray and snowy sky outside the window. I heard that the speech for the best movie in yesterday's awards ceremony was written by Bob. I have always admired this Mr. Chief Editor. The speech was written very well, very much like you. He looked out of the window or at the traces of water that slowly slid down the glass. He didn't look back. His voice echoed in the room, and then passed to another planet through the phone on the dark desk. The speech was written very much like your character. There are many crazy people like you in this world. Those incompetent lunatics usually only dare to attack the weak, such as children or women, because this method of venting anger to find mental peace can be achieved safely and easily. But few people dare to slap the Lin family in the face like you did. The people were shocked and speechless, and the humiliation was unbearable. It takes real courage and madness to trample on the family's glory that the elders value the most. You know, even I am sometimes afraid and deeply puzzled. Why can the 7 families survive for such a long time in the Federation without self-destructing because of too much energy? Lin Banshan's calm and steady eyes showed a hint of a smile. He said, the elders haven't met a crazy person like you for many years. They are not used to dealing with people like you, so I will talk to you about the follow-up measures. Speaking of this, the man who once shocked the 7 families paused slightly and said, although I have already broken out of the door, I believe I am qualified to be this representative. The phone on the huge black wooden desk was silent for a moment, then Su Li's sincere and serious voice sounded. I have heard a lot of stories about you, from the black car race near the special zone to Bermuda, many stories. The last time we met on the train, you left a deep impression on me. Sometimes I even feel like I worship you, because you live a free and easy life, but I can't seem to be so free and easy. I have to remind you that now is not the time to talk about admiration. Lin Banshan replied with a smile, although the patience of the elderly is better than ours, there is still a limit, especially when the youngest child he dotes on the most could die at any time. He lowered his head and glanced at the De Fei watch on his left wrist. I'm not in Bermuda right now. I'm in S3, but it's impossible for me to appear at the scene. I think, in order to prevent the old people from exploding in anger and prevent a large-scale civil war in the Federation, we should reach an agreement as soon as possible. Hearing this, Su Li's crisp voice immediately sounded from the other end of the phone. I'll let him go. Hearing this answer, Lin Banshan's brows finally furrowed slightly. He turned around and looked at the phone on the black desk. He didn't expect the other party to make such a decision so quickly and decisively. Sitting on a sofa in the corner of the room were Zhang Xiaohua and a pale-faced middle-aged man in black. When they heard Su Li's answer, they couldn't help but raise their eyebrows and reveal a surprised expression. The matter of the assassination in the Sunset Province ends here. Su Li said on the phone, I'll let Lin Dohai go because your father has apologized, and I believe in you. But this belief has nothing to do with your identity as a legend. Regarding the Macklin case, whether it was intentional or not, you helped me after all. His identity was revealed by you in Bermuda. Another thing is, last time in the carriage, you cancelled the engagement between Lin Dohai and Miss Nan Xiang. After thinking about it, I really admire you because this has nothing to do with your interests or even your style of doing things. It's just about the happiness of an ordinary girl. You're a good person. Hearing Su Li's serious evaluation on the other end of the phone, Lin Banshan was silent for a long time. The middle-aged man in black and Zhang Xiaohua in the room opened their mouths at the same time. Their expressions were a little strange, as if they wanted to laugh, but they didn't dare to laugh in front of him. Under the premise of the glory of the charter shrouding the wilderness, Lin Banshan could still wave his sleeves lightly, break through the door, and coldly face his family. With just his hands, he could invade and move freely between day and night, conquering a large and unique landscape. Although he was used to wearing an ordinary gray coat and personally taking care of Lin Yuan, where even the old man of Feicheng City would choose to rest temporarily when he went to the capital, countless tragic past events, countless corpses that fell at his feet, and the underground industry kingdom that spanned across the Federation and the capital ring had already proven what kind of person he was. The lady in the back mountain of Macho once said that he could be a hero in troubled times. In fact, a person like him would inevitably become a hero even in peaceful times. For Lin Banshan, the Federation officials and dignitaries, the pirates of Bermuda, and the underground world feared him, respected him, and hated him, but there were even more people who couldn't wait to eat his flesh, but very few people would cast this kind of emotion. Today was the first time he heard someone use the identity of a good person to describe him. Lin Banshan's mood was a little inexplicable. He felt that the little guy on the other end of the phone was really a very interesting person. The Federation government and the Ministry of Defense won't make a documentary for people like me, so I'm not used to hearing this kind of praise. I'm more used to solving problems. Lin Dohai is my younger brother. There is a saying in the Federation that brothers are born with half of their lives. He wants to kill you, so it's natural that you want to kill him. Since you didn't kill him, I'll take over this half of his life. From today onwards, I owe you half of my life. Although I really want to say that you don't have to worry about the anger of the elders, I can't say for sure whether this kind of decadent family is keeping their promises for the sake of dignity or not. After all, I left because I thought these things were too boring. He continued calmly, but I can guarantee that Lin Dohai will be brought back to S3, and I will personally find someone to look after him. Group 7 under you contributed and took risks in the incident in Sunset State. 100 million in cash is their compensation. Of course, this money is paid by the elders in the family, I'm just saying. On the beach in another manner, Sulu held the phone and didn't quite react. He originally thought that there would be countless soldiers and police surrounding the manor, or even later, the Lin family would show him the true power of the 7 great families. However, he didn't expect that the content of the phone call seemed to develop toward a ridiculous plot. In the dense green forest, a thick piece of wood covered with moss suddenly moved. Xiong Linquan, who was in perfect disguise, heard the words from the communication system and was so shocked that his body trembled slightly. He lowered his voice and said with a trembling voice, 100 million. That's much more generous than Mr. Nutshell. Old Bai, damn it, how many times did we have to do to earn that much money? 50 meters away from the manor's computer control room, in a dark underground sewer, 3 members of Team 7 were carefully listening to the conversation in their ears. Gu Shifeng, who was in charge of hacking and controlling the security system, froze on the keyboard. She excitedly said into the mini microphone, "Fuck, following the boss to do private work, this situation is really different." Hidden in an inconspicuous gray building at the edge of the forest, all the bodyguards in the manor had already been disarmed and gathered. Bai Yulan, who was in charge of the operation, was in the office next door. He sat on a chair and listened to the voice in the headset. He couldn't help but smile. His nimble fingers gently flicked a delicate knife. A sharp military knife was hidden in the woven cloth scabbard at the bottom of his left hand. The H-12 long-case pistol lay quietly on his thigh. That expert from the Lin family, Uncle Kong, sat silently on the chair opposite him. 7 groups of ice and fire quietly occupied the manor. White Magnolia directly entered this place. When the two met, they sat silently facing each other. From the beginning to the end, they did not make a move. Uncle Kong's slightly gloomy cheeks carried a trace of regret of aging. After the phone call ended, Lin Banshan said to the pale-faced middle-aged man in black, "Last time you said that Li Xiaotong sent a young man named Li Wei to Bermuda, and in the end, it was found that he was Su Li's friend?" It's been confirmed, but it's strange that we couldn't find out why Lieutenant Colonel Su Lu knew this person. What's even stranger is that I once asked for help in your name from the Bureau of Proclamation, only to find that many of the files had been classified as top secret. Hearing this, Lin Banshan's eyes narrowed slightly. After a long silence, he said, "That's all. Don't investigate anymore. Some things are not something we can touch." "Understood," the middle-aged man in black replied simply. Tell Bermuda to keep an eye on the man named Li Wei. Don't let him lose half an eyebrow. Lin Banshan said with slight ridicule, "It doesn't feel good to owe Su Lu half a life. Looking at this young man's ability, it seems that it will be difficult for us to save his life. Protecting his friend is also considered as paying back some interest. If the Lin family really wants to retaliate, Su Lu and his team members will definitely not be able to stop them. Will he ask for help from Philadelphia, or will he say that he hopes that Mr. President will speak up? To be honest, I'm really curious about what kind of storm your family will stir up in the Federation once they launch an all-out attack." Zhang Xiaohua stood behind him and asked with a smile. The tattoo was deformed as it broke free from his collar, and it was exceptionally bright. "If father believes what I said on the phone just now, then there won't be any storm after this, only peace." Lin Banshan said with a complicated expression, "You and I both know how ruthless the two experts who went to the West Woods from Bermuda are. But the most frightening thing is not the result of them not killing Su Lu, but the absolute control Su Lu showed in this assassination. The plan of the three idiots, if not for the tacit consent and help of the old man, how could it be woven so meticulously? The power of the family is spread in every corner of the Federation's structure. Even the tiger of the Zhong family would find it difficult to organize the plan, but Su Lu, this guy, took a dozen people and solved it so easily, and responded so accurately and concisely. I always have a feeling that from the beginning, Su Lu knew all the plans." Lin Banshan frowned and said, "I don't understand how he did it." In the earlier phone call, he sternly warned his loathsome father, "Such a person is not easy to kill." According to his character, if you can't kill him, you may be killed by him, and the probability of this is very high. If the 7 families were really omnipotent, why didn't they just blow up the president's official residence or by the lake in Philadelphia? If they couldn't do it, then they shouldn't provoke Su Lu. Lin Banshan thought so. Chapter 550. Today, Su Lu led his troops and caused such a mess in broad daylight to warn those old men who are used to hiding in the shadows and controlling everything, "Don't mess with me." This declaration may be meaningless, but firearms and strength are the real power. Now, this guy can summon at least 2 battalions at any time. The 2 battalions here refer to the loyal ones, the ones who are willing to violate military discipline and law for him. In addition to the trump cards he hasn't revealed yet, if it were me back then, I might have tried to be so crazy. Lin Banshan took out a specially long cigarette from his gray coat and lit it. He took a puff and said with a faint smile, "When we got off the train, we once said that he was too young and not frivolous. Now it seems that he finally has some of the taste of a normal person. He is a little frivolous, but I don't know where his frivolous confidence comes from." Using the word intelligent to describe Lin Banshan would be too shallow and shallow. The people in the Federation could only see the powerful combat power of Su Lu and Group 7, the trust and affection the president had for him, and the secret relationship between him and the old man of Philadelphia. However, no one could gradually touch on the most critical issue from the assassination in Sunset Province and other details like him. This person resolutely gave up his identity as the heir of an aristocratic family in his early years, arrogantly betrayed his family, and broke off all ties with his father's generation. He relied on his own hands to start from the bottom. After a long time, the wisdom of the aristocratic family's education, coupled with the beast-like survival instinct forged from a bloody life, allowed him to smell the most dangerous scent. That was the part that made Sulu dare to be frivolous. However, no matter how sharp his mind was, there was no way for him to truly guess the truth of the matter. This was because that part of the story had already exceeded the imagination of ordinary people and carried a mysterious aura. Therefore, he could only seriously warn his father and those important figures that Sulu had tried to warn. As for whether those people would accept it or not, it was not within his control. Being able to know and accompany the Federal Central Computer and having Sequence 1 authority was Su Li's greatest asset. This asset was far more powerful than the mysterious power in his body. It was more unshakable than the shadow cast by Mr. Pabre and the military god Li Pifu behind him. It was because of this confidence that he dared to directly challenge the 7 great families. No matter how powerful those families were, they could only hide in the shadows of history and try to influence the progress of mankind. In a sense, the charter computer he relied on was the history of mankind. The 7 great families, who had infiltrated all levels of the Federation and had unlimited potential, were extremely powerful existences to anyone. However, if these families wanted to launch certain actions against Sulu, no matter how secretive these actions were, it would be impossible to escape the omnipresent surveillance of the Federal Central Computer. Sulu and his subordinates would have an incomparable amount of time to draw up the most precise and even tailor-made plans to counter the other party's overflowing waves. The 7 great families, who were mysterious and terrifying in the eyes of ordinary people, were nothing more than countless dots of light in his left eye's vision. As long as he wanted to, he could know every order that the head of the Lin family issued. He could dig up all of the spies these families had in the government. He could easily find out the secret of the black chair that the Li family's elder had always sat on. He could even spy on everything in this half of the universe, such as entering the Nanxiang family's manor to see what it was. Of course, the first charter's absolute protection of citizens' privacy would inevitably bring some inconvenience to Su Li's requests. At the very least, the intelligence hidden under the Bureau of Proclamation would have to struggle a lot with its self-righteous and impulsive ideas. Su Li didn't want to accept himself as such a terrifying existence. He also couldn't get used to being like a god above all living things, overlooking the beauty and ugliness of billions of people. However, when he and the people he cared about were threatened, he absolutely didn't mind using this killing machine. 3 days after the Nebula Awards, the craze for the 7 teams and the documentary of the same name continued to heat up in the Federation. The Lin family, who had suffered unprecedented humiliation, was obviously still hesitating. Su Li, who had left other mountains, and the 7 team members, who were on vacation again, didn't receive any official investigation or private revenge. There was only a vague feeling of wind and thunder accumulating in the atmosphere of this planet. It was unknown when it would explode like thunder or quietly disperse. The carnival of ordinary people was a sharp contrast to the tense atmosphere in the upper class, which they had never seen before. Translator, Transin editor, Transin at 6:00 in the morning, the old man in old-fashioned clothes in Feiqing City took a fishing rod made of old green bamboo and sat on the boulder beside the lake. He began to fish silently, ponder or recuperate from the exhaustion accumulated by the battlefield decades ago. His son, General Li Jiedu, the dean of the First Military Academy of the Federation, hurried back from the capital special district. His calm and elegant temperament had long been replaced by anxiety. After the father and son had a brief conversation that no one knew about, Li Zidao returned to the house and made a phone call. In short, a conflict that should have been like a flood disappeared silently. No one knew that on the night when the decision to stop was made, there was a top-secret call from the Bureau of Proclamation that directly hacked into the landline of the Lin family's study. The director of the Bureau of Proclamation, who had never been in contact with the political figures of the Federation or the leaders of the big families, didn't say too much on the phone. He just gently reminded the other party that once things started, they would be forced to continue. And the Bureau of Proclamation, which had never interfered with the specific social affairs, might do something because of some procedural issues that had no choice but to do what a beautiful spring day. Su Lu, who had vented all the pent-up anger from the assassination, looked out the window at the black and white mountains in the distance and revealed a happy smile. He knew very well that behind this peace and tranquility, there were certainly countless people wrestling, but he didn't care. Lin Dohai was under house arrest again. Zhong Erlang in the West Woods would probably find it difficult to leave Jingwei too. The good-for-nothing son of the leader of Nanshui would probably only be able to pass his days in Green Dragon Mountain. The beautiful scenery outside the window was still beautiful, and that was enough. Angry reprimands constantly rang out from the phone that was held far away from his ear. Sulu answered very sincerely and then heard the Minister of Defense on the other end of the phone ask in a deep voice, "If there is a next time, what will you do?" Sulu was silent for a moment and then answered seriously, "I will directly kill him." Minister Zhou was also silent for a moment and then said, "I didn't hear that." Chapter 551. The last 3 exams for politics and history are next week. Lu Hua still has 2 shots of vaccine, but I came to eat with you at this time. Zhou Yu put down the utensils in her hands. A trace of annoyance flashed through her beautiful eyes. She said, "Do you think I have so much time to chat with you?" In an instant, Sulu sensed a familiar smell coming from the bright red flower in the girl's black hair across the table. He quickly lowered his head and cut the bloody but not meaty fried number 2 piece of meat, so as to avoid provoking the girl to the point where she would really feel good. "Do you have any self-awareness? Because of your and your subordinates' arrogant actions, the Federation's upper echelons have been in an uproar these past 2 days. How many important people have been silently negotiating and wrestling?" Zhou Yu could only see his forehead. She couldn't help but furrow her brows. She picked up the napkin and wiped the corner of her mouth. She said, "A small spark can detonate the Federation's largest ammunition depot. In your opinion, killing your way into Lin Banshan's manor and trampling the Lin family's face under your feet is a very satisfying small matter. But do you know? This revenge action almost caused the situation in the entire Federation to spiral out of control. The President and the military's pro-war faction, as well as the families controlling the Federation's parliament, were only a small distance away from the danger of direct conflict. Although fortunately, the situation didn't worsen in the end." She looked at his forehead and said seriously, "But I can tell you clearly that this morning, an important bill was signed in the President's official residence. Unexpectedly, it was directly rejected by the Parliament, because of you." Su Lu raised his head. He would never be able to be as passionate about these complicated and bizarre political conflicts as he was when he was researching mechanics or cultivating the strength in his body. He also lacked the sensitivity and talent in this area. He didn't know when it started, but Zhou Yu had started to analyze all the problems for him and dispel the political fog on his path forward. He was also used to this kind of help. Zhou Yu would help him think about things that he didn't understand. Over time, he became more and more dull in this aspect, and he joyfully enjoyed this kind of dullness that didn't require much effort. Because there was no need to think about it. The girl's forcefully suppressed anger and serious analysis naturally drilled into his left ear and then out of his right. Looking at that beautiful face, his thoughts had long drifted to other places. He subconsciously propped up his chin and furrowed his brows. He began to recall the scene when he first met her. He couldn't understand how the arrogant and cold red-clothed noble daughter that made him extremely disgusted could become a calm and lively unmarried mother and form such a close and trusting relationship with him. "Are you listening or not?" Zhou Yu's delicate eyebrows raised slightly as she said coldly. Sulu woke up with a start and realized that he seemed to have a habit of reminiscing about the past. Was it really like what Mr. Sher said, that he already had the stale aura of an old man despite his young age? I'm listening," he picked up the glass and drank a mouthful of water. He said vaguely, continue. Last time, we analyzed the two conversations between Commander Zhong and Mr. President, and we can clearly see that the government and the military are strongly in favor of war, while the Parliament Hill and the families behind them hold the opposite view. Because of their partnership with Mr. President, Macho Hill hasn't expressed their opinion for the time being. Although the Zhong family in the West Woods doesn't agree with the overly conservative attitude of the other families, they don't want the West Woods to become the Federation's cannon fodder again. Therefore, the Zhong family should be holding the military tightly and watching coldly from the sidelines. The conflict between the two sides is now covered up by the victory at the front line and the fanaticism of the people, but no one can say for sure when it will erupt in the future. The Federation government and the military definitely don't want their base camp to be unstable when they go on an expedition to the Empire in the future. Therefore, they hope to use the current momentum to suppress these opposing views in advance. The Nebula Awards ceremony that night was a kind of momentum building. You agreed to attend, in the eyes of many people, because you represented the will of the old man Fei Cheng. However, this kind of momentum building is the same as the spring rain entering the soil. Once the momentum is established, even if the families want to oppose, the Parliament Hill can't jump out and do something right in front of them at the risk of being abandoned by the fanatical voters. This is a relatively gentle struggle that both sides can accept. What you did, however, suddenly put this kind of power struggle in broad daylight, and quickly intensified. Because a lot of people don't understand why you did this. Of course, I know that you are purely a person who holds grudges. You don't care that the other party is the heir of the 7 families. However, no one will believe that you risked the anger of the 7 families just to find a good mood. At this point, Zoe couldn't help but shake her head. She said, people are speculating whether or not your crazy provocation of the Lin family represents the attitude of the old man Fei Cheng or the president's official residence. At this point, the level of the situation quickly escalated. That side believes that the government is using your revenge to make a strong declaration in order to force them to back down. In this way, this kind of backing down is no longer just a matter of the family's dignity. It involves the great conflict between the two sides regarding the future of the Federation. This level of conflict is the source of the terrifying and dangerous smell that has made it difficult for many people to breathe these days. Fortunately, that side finally backed down in the end. I have to say that your luck is really good. You clearly ignited the ammunition depot, but the Federation is still peaceful. No one shot or assassinated the president, civil war hasn't broken out, and the West Woods still hasn't become independent. Zoe, you finished the last cold political joke with slight sarcasm. Her long eyelashes drooped slightly, and she drank a mouthful of water to moisten her throat before continuing to eat. When Su Lu heard the last part, his expression became complicated and strange. After a moment of silence, he explained in a serious and sincere voice with a hoarse voice, I just wanted to scare those important people, hoping to deter them so that they wouldn't keep trying to assassinate me like they did in Sunset State. I just wanted to make life less troublesome. I really never thought that this matter would become so big and affect so far. Bai Yulan had once lamented that Su Li's greatest ability was to simplify the most complicated things. However, when he heard Su Li's words today, he realized with a slight chill that the simple logic that had been in place for many years would become incomparably complicated because of the change in status and background. No, you don't know the really complicated and interesting things behind the scenes of this matter. In my opinion, that is the most interesting part of this drama. Zoe Yu raised her head and smiled bitterly. In the beginning, Fei Cheng thought that you were carrying out the will of the official residents, but the government thought it was the old man's idea. In the end, the two sides couldn't agree. They found that once you entered, there was another world to eat, and, the crown prince thought it was the madam's idea. No one would have thought that this was your own idea. She looked at Su Lu like she was looking at a monster. She shook her head and sighed. A certain simple-minded man returned from the front lines but still did things according to the simple rules of the battlefield. When the important people behind you finally understood, it was already too late. They could only take the risk and go with the flow. In the end, who would have thought that there would be a very good ending in the end? In the past, when I had afternoon tea with the madam, she would sometimes talk about some political anecdotes of the previous dynasty. At the time, I was very surprised. Why were so many major events in history caused by insignificant matters? Zhou Yu looked at him and said helplessly, "Very interesting. I didn't think that I would actually see a living example right now." Because of a strange guy's impulse, the Federation government, which originally needed to spend countless amounts of time and energy to do this, inexplicably seized the opportunity first. Su Lu thought seriously for a long time. Then he raised his head and said seriously, "I really don't understand these things." Zhou Yu smiled slightly. She thought that it was probably because he couldn't understand or was too lazy to think about it that this guy could make so many people, including the president, like him. Just as she was thinking this, she heard his next topic. The warm feeling in her heart suddenly disappeared, and a touch of anger and dullness filled her beautiful eyes. "Mr. Shi is really a good person. Although I know that there is a problem with his identity, and Minister Zhou will find it difficult to agree, but love is free. This lawsuit can be taken to the Supreme Court. I believe that your father doesn't want to be scolded by Justice He Ying," Su Lu said with a smile. Zhou Yu was too lazy to answer this question. "He said that he wants to marry you because you are beautiful and you gave birth to a son for him." Su Lu looked at her expression and said seriously. Zhou Yu's delicate eyebrows suddenly raised. She was very angry. "From this, I know that he really likes you. He wants to settle down." Su Lu didn't care about her expression. He continued to smile and said, "Maybe you think that this logic is very strange, but in fact, this theory of falling in love was taught to me by him. He once said that men only become stupid and clumsy in front of the person they really like. Only then will they use this kind of stupid male animal language in front of their friends to hide their feelings of love. You should know that he can be said to be the most flirtatious man in the Federation. So I believe that the sweet words from his mouth can be repeated in 3 million words, and can charm countless women. Even the most sincere oath of love, he can repeat it countless times before he goes to bed with a strange woman. But only when it comes to you, there is no such thing, only a clumsy cover-up. At that moment, even a guy like me has grasped the biggest weakness of this saint of flowers. In the past, I was definitely on his side. Now, I'm standing between the two of you. If he was still the old him, I wouldn't have persuaded you to be together. But now, I feel that it's necessary for me to introduce him to you again." Chapter 552. "What is it?" Su Lu asked, puzzled. "I always feel that you're in a hurry to marry me off." Zhou Yu looked at him with a half-smile and mocked, "But the problem is that you're not my father, although you do have a tendency to act like an old man." Every time this beautiful and charming woman smiled, her eyebrows would be raised like the tip of a sword, piercing the other party's heart. "The bigger problem is that we've lived together for half a year. Which big shot in the capital special administrative region doesn't know that we have a common son? Now that you're involved in scandals with others every day, I'm already embarrassed enough. In the end, you're in a hurry to get rid of me so that you can get close to those flowers and plants. Don't you think this is a little shameless?" Hearing Zhou Yu's mocking tone, Su Lu was speechless. Because when he thought about it carefully, this matter was always his fault. But when it came to certain flowers and plants, he couldn't help but want to explain. "I have nothing to do with them." Using plural words like them, you actually have the guts to say you have nothing to do with them? I'm really curious why the Women's Rights Foundation hasn't troubled you. Is it because you're a war hero of the Federation? Zhou Yu shook her head and mocked, "In the past 2 years, you haven't made any progress in other skills, but that guy has taught you a lot about womanizing. This has nothing to do with Shirqinghai. Su Le sighed and said somewhat helplessly, I've told you before. At my age, I should be in a relationship, preparing to get married and have children. But the problem is, I can't find a partner. Or rather, I don't know who I want to spend the rest of my life with the most. When you decided to enter the Nutshell University, earn money to buy a house and a car, and marry Zhang Xiaomeng, why didn't you hesitate? Zhou Yu continued her mocking. As close friends, she knew too many secrets of Su Lu. It was also because of this friendship that she never had a trace of positive feelings toward the leaf of Green Dragon Mountain. Strangely, Shirqinghai seemed to be the same. Su Li's mood was gloomy as he drank the water without saying a word. Zhou Yu looked at him for a while and suddenly said calmly, you like everyone, but no matter who it is, you haven't reached the peak of liking because you can't put all your feelings into it. You're a guy with no sense of security. You've always refused to tell me the specific reason, and I'm too lazy to guess. But I think you've never been sure what your life will be like, so you've never had the courage to start a formal relationship. The reason why you had such courage in the beginning when you were with Zhang Xiaomeng was partly because that woman might have some tricks up her sleeve. Zhou Yu did not miss any opportunity to mock the girl who was busy working on the Parliament Hill. On the other hand, it's because he's your first love. When an ignorant male animal is in heat for the first time, he doesn't care if he's going to be smashed to pieces. Hearing these words, Su Lu felt extremely awkward. It was rare for him to retaliate and mock her. From these words, I can see that you and Shirqinghai are the same type of people. I don't completely deny this point, but being the same type of people doesn't mean that we have to spend the rest of our lives together. Zhou Yu was unmoved and continued to mock him. Only a guy like you would be so boring in any relationship that he would directly use marriage and children as the premise. He would often say that he would stay with her for the rest of his life. The pressure is too great, so naturally, you don't have the courage to continue. But not long ago, I formally asked one of them to be in a relationship, but I was tragically rejected by her, Su Lu said doubtfully. It's obvious that the life and death experiences on the battlefield made you secrete too much testosterone. As for the reason why that smart girl rejected you, it's very simple. It's because anyone can see that you're seriously lacking in sincerity when you asked for a relationship. Zhou Yu frowned and replied, girls always need some mental things. Even a simple-minded and focused genius like Shang Qiu might not necessarily be an idiot when it comes to relationships. With just a few empty words, you want to trick a baby-faced, big-breasted genius engineer into marriage, and at the same time, design and repair mecha for you. How can there be such a good deal in the world? For us women, feelings are always the most important thing. Zhou Yu calmed down and said, I've always thought that we are very good friends, partners who can trust each other the most. But recently, you've been trying to get me and Shirqinghai together. This kind of forced feeling makes me very uncomfortable. Su Lu thought about it silently, trying to feel her discomfort from her perspective. Unfortunately, he couldn't figure out this kind of complicated relationship in such a short amount of time. He could only explain, I really want to see my best friend, an outstanding man and woman like the two of you together. Perhaps I've always thought that this would be like the happy ending of a fairy tale in a novel. The problem is that I don't understand Shirqinghai as a person. Zhou Yu's expression was calm as she said, back when I was pregnant with Lu Hua, you told me the story of this rascal young master every day. I have to admit that the Shirqinghai you spoke of at that time did indeed have some charm. A spy from Green Dragon Mountain hidden in the political system, walking in the dark to avenge his teacher. As long as you're a girl, you'll probably be attracted to this kind of dark hero. But in the end, that's just a story. She took off the gorgeous red flower in her black hair, looked at the petals, and said in a daze, I don't know what he likes to eat, whether it's the same or completely opposite to mine. I don't know what kind of clothes he likes to wear, whether it makes me feel disgusted when I look at them. I don't know his shoe size, nor his birthday. I'm indeed curious about such a strange man, because after all, he's the child's biological father. I even once had some childish suspicions and expectations, but it's impossible for me to like him just because of your nagging. What I couldn't accept the most was that when he first entered my world with a clear image, he suddenly became an idiot who blocked the West Mountain compound every day, pestering me with emails, text messages, and unpleasant songs. He only had a good-looking face but was not magnanimous at all. Zhou Yu shook her head and said with slight mockery, once an ideal is reflected in reality, curiosity and expectations will all be broken by the sun. I don't agree with your harsh view of Mr. Shi. His partners and comrades in arms, the things he has done, and the important positions he holds now, there's nothing about him that makes him look like an idiot. Su Lu rubbed the dull pain between his eyebrows and said helplessly, as I said before, his clumsiness in front of you just proves that he cares. I thought that after such a long time of frequent correspondence with you, you should know a lot about each other. Who knew? Do you really not have any feelings for him at all? I don't know. Zhou Yu maintained her usual temperament and answered very simply and quickly, I don't know enough about him, and there's not enough time. I need to observe. Fortunately, at least there's still a possibility. Su Lu shrugged with a smile and said seriously, you don't like to be pushed to do something. I admit that I didn't think it through thoroughly. If you still can't accept that guy after thinking it through, of course, I'll support you. That's a friend. I'm glad that you didn't show the attitude of not treating me as a friend, but as a woman who only treats me as a friend. Zhou Yu smiled sweetly, and the coldness turned into a warm spring breeze. She said, this matter ends here. Don't be nosy. I'll think about it myself. Su Lu smiled, called the waiter to sign the bill, and then walked out of the Linyuan with her. At this time, dark clouds suddenly covered the sky, and the late spring sunshine was all blocked. A gust of wind came out of nowhere, and with the drizzle like silk, the temperature suddenly dropped a lot. Zhou Yu, who was only wearing thin underwear, frowned slightly and subconsciously hugged her shoulders. Su Lu was a guy who was very nostalgic, or it could be said that his memory was so good that his way of thinking was somewhat different. When he first met Tai Ziyuan at Yue University in H1, the other party was a pale, weak, and unconscious teenager. Therefore, he regarded the crown prince as a weak person who needed his protection. A long time ago, when Zhou Yu was pregnant, Su Lu was responsible for taking care of everything from food to daily life. During that time, the proud and cold daughter of a powerful family came into contact with the ordinary life of the secular world, and her outlook on life had some subtle changes. The biggest impact of that time on Su Lu was that until today, in his heart, Yuzi was still that pregnant woman who needed to be carefully taken care of. Zhou Yu's short red windbreaker was hanging on his elbow. In the chilly wind and drizzle, he naturally shook open the windbreaker and draped it over her shoulders. Zhou Yu naturally got into the windbreaker and didn't say thank you. It was a matter of course, and they cooperated with each other very well. Because of this tacit understanding, the two friends of the opposite sex who had no romantic feelings were slightly startled, and then smiled at each other. The gorgeous red flower in the girl's hand was exceptionally gentle. A dark green military vehicle stopped at the entrance of the Linyuan restaurant. The orderly got out of the car and ran over, hurriedly opening the umbrella and preparing to help the young lady into the car. I drove the black car here, I'll send you back, Su Lu said. Zhou Yu shook her head, calmly and with a hint of examination, her gaze swept over Su Li's shoulder, and looked at the dim corner outside the restaurant where the light rain was blowing. A trace of an interesting smile appeared on her lips, and said, the person you should send is here. Go, otherwise these flowers and plants will be ruined by the rain. Su Lu was stunned and followed her gaze, only to see a beautiful girl in a light blue dress standing there. The girl's slightly curly black hair was dyed by the rain, adding a trace of tranquil beauty. However, her expression was extremely nervous, with a trace of embarrassment in her shyness, as if she wanted to quickly escape from this place. Nan Xiangmei had just returned to S1 a few days ago. Because of the changes in the journey, she was very regretful and even a little sad that she didn't see the award ceremony that made Group 7 famous in the universe. Then there was the conflict that happened at the seaside. The major forces at the top of the Federation's power were extremely nervous, but for this young lady of the 7 major families, she didn't care about these complicated things in her heart, only simple joy, because she knew that he had returned and was in S1. She asked a distant uncle who held an important position in the Federation's investigation bureau for help. Nan Xiangmei knew that Su Lu was coming to Linyuan today, so she came here purely subconsciously. However, when she was cheering herself on cutely at the entrance of the restaurant, she saw the scene of Su Lu sending Zhou Yu out. She saw the tacit understanding between the young man and woman at the entrance of the restaurant very clearly. Suddenly, she remembered that he seemed to have a rumored fiancée, who should be Minister Zhou's daughter. He had a scandal with the national girl that everyone liked, and there was also that beautiful female official from Green Dragon Mountain. This was not a vulgar scene. Naturally, it wouldn't cause a man and a woman who loved each other to be separated because of a misunderstanding. They hadn't seen each other for 70 years, and they were sorry for each other until their hair turned white. Nan Xiangmei was a little sad because she realized that she had only met him 3 times and wasn't familiar with him. She didn't even have the right to misunderstand or be jealous of him, so she lowered her head slightly in the rain and cold wind, clenched her delicate fists, and stood in the dark corner, not daring to go forward. This was the first time I liked a man, this was my first love. If I gradually grew up and found that he wasn't worth liking, I would probably reflect on my childish and ridiculous infatuation at that time. Decades later, I would tell my grandson about my stupidity under the sun, and sternly order him not to associate with a girl in the civilian area, but 2 years had passed, and he was the same as before, even more worthy of respect and love than before. Then, this infatuation would become deeper and deeper, right? Nan Xiangmei said to herself in her heart. Then she took a deep breath, raised her head to meet the other's gaze, squeezed out a sweet smile with difficulty, and bravely walked over, but she didn't realize that the crystal-clear water droplets on her hair were gently trembling with her body. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.